They say the scroll Joseph used is missing. That's the real Book of Abraham, and it was on a different papyrus, one that just conveniently disappeared. But here's the thing. The fragments we do have, they match exactly what Joseph was translating from. So either the missing scroll was the greatest vanishing act in church history, or the story just doesn't add up. You decide. Next on Mormonism Live.
Wow, people come and go so quickly around here. Good evening, Mr. Real. How are you doing?
Excellent. How are you?
Great. That's just a hard fade off. It's like we don't have a fade on the light switch anymore. We just got off and we got on.
The applause used to be separate from the intro music and the video display, and it would sometimes cause audio issues. So now it runs really smoothly, but the fade out is just not as gentle.
It's like they just all jumped off a cliff right in the middle of applauding us.
Maybe they were cast into a group of swine and off they went.
I hope it's not symbolic for anything about this show.
No, I hope not. Let's see what happens. There's no demons here.
Let's see how many of the listeners end up jumping off a cliff. This is going to be a great show tonight. You've been working hard on this, and this is really important. And I want to say one thing here.
Please.
Is it okay? Is now okay?
Yep.
Everybody. Public announcement, okay? I have been having in the works, in my mind, a book, which I'm trying to write. And by trying, I mean not getting around to mostly. I had finally, this has been for years, I wanted to do this. And now I think I really need to. And I've had a number of things that have prompted me, too many for me to keep ignoring. And so you say, well, why don't you sit down and write your book? Okay, that's the problem. I have certain time commitments, and they're all over the place, and a lot of them are on screen, and a lot of them are preparing for what happens on screen. But here's the thing. There's a lot of you who are wonderful, wonderful listeners to the show who have messaged me on Facebook or emailed me on actually 2 different platforms. So there's 3 all in all. And I have responded. You've responded back for the most part. And so I have no idea, a lot of communications going back and forth with a number of different people in the show or listeners to the show. And so it has come to the point where it's consuming so much time, is what I'm trying to say. That if I had that time available for writing my book, I think I could get around to writing my book. So what I'd like to do, I think that there's not anybody who's written to me or we've exchanged messages who's going to like hold this against me. I hope not. But if you could be patient with me and just know that I'm not ignoring you, I'm just not responding to you. I'm not ignoring you, but that I'm trying to use this time to write a book, which hopefully will be done by the end of the year. I don't know why it wouldn't, but that's my plan. So that's my goal. So I hope that you understand. Okay, so that was the whole thing. And I'm going to have to make this announcement, I think, several times. I want to make sure everybody hears it. Out of all the people who listen to the show, this is going to be a very small percentage. But they're a percentage that 100% of them are very important to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The folks that watch this show, that support the program financially, that tune in as viewers, they're what make all of this fun and make this possible. So we very much appreciate all of you, and I'm really excited that you're writing a book, and I can't wait to see that come out. A couple of other little things, and I know think you had something else as well, but I just want to note to folks. First off, join our mailing list. We send out a newsletter. It's not super often. We're not going to bombard you with things multiple times a week. I send something out at most once a month, and usually it's about every other month. So if you'll join the mailing list, you see the link there on the screen, but you also can see the link in the live chat. So please do that. Just a note. And also, donations are crucial to what we do. There's a lot of work that goes into this. I mean, I think you'll see tonight the amount of historical documentation as we go into depth on the Book of Abraham, kind of some bare bone basics, but then lay out how the missing scroll got invented, what the evidence for it is, what the evidence against it is, and to show a few other cool connections along the way. So please consider going to mormonismlive.org, click the donate button, send RFM and I just a few bucks a month, $5 a month, $10 a month. And I know there's a few folks out there who have the means. And we've been lucky over the years to have really big donors step up from time to time. And we could really use that at the moment. And so if anybody is out there who has the means, could be a bigger supporter of the program, could donate at a little bit larger amount, please do consider going to mormonismlive.org, click the donate button and send us a recurring donation. And it would be very much appreciated. And we appreciate all of you who support this program. And it's been so much fun. I started doing this back in 2012. You've been doing this with me since 2017. And we hope to do this for, decades longer. And we both have got other episodes in mind. I've got a list.
I know I do.
Yeah. I've got a list of stuff, of maybe 100 things to do, still cover. And you're going to see over the next month, 2 months, a bunch of things on the Book of Abraham that I've been working on, and including, by the way, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. on the Mormon Discussion YouTube channel, and a 90-minute video is going to release that will just give a really good overview of the Book of Abraham. I allowed Dan Vogel to pre-watch the program. If you're in the chat tonight, Dan, you're free to say anything positive or negative about the thing if you want. I would rather have the truth than you just say the nice thing.
I'd rather just have the positive.
But he shared like 3 or 4 things in the 90 minutes that I was a little wrong on. And I fixed those. And so the newest version has all those corrections. So I don't think anything is dramatically off or inaccurate. I think for the most part, it is an entirely factual video that will lay out the entire issue all around. And some of that is what gave me the idea to go into this tonight. Anything else from you, Radio Free Mormon?
No, not at this point. Thank you very much. I just came up with a brilliant insight, which I hope to remember to share when the time.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, make sure you got to keep it written down. By the way, he does great notes. So good on him. Kenny B, thank you very much for the super sticker.
Oh, thanks.
Much appreciated. And then one other quick little thing before we jump
Kenny B at the opera the other night.
What's that?
I saw Kenny B at the opera.
Kenny B.
That was actually a musical theater.
Oh, okay. No.
He corrected me. That's actually Kenny G.
Yeah. There you go. So
that's his big brother.
Just one other little thing. RFM and I will both be at Sunstone. I am going to be speaking Friday evening, close to Friday evening, maybe like 4:30 or 4:45 to 5:30 or 5:45. It's an hour-long session. And I'm going to share in that session a ton of insights that I've picked up in the last month on the Book of Abraham. So that should be a fun conversation. Mm-hmm. And then Saturday...
Why is it that I'm just hearing about this now, Bill?
Well, because I just got it all finished up with Lindsay Hansen Park today. So
okay, I was just wondering.
Yeah. I messaged her like a week ago. She got back to me yesterday, and today I submitted my topic, my 100 or less word synopsis, and a bio of the incredible presenter who'll be doing that session. And then
really? Well, for most of us common people, the deadline was April 15th, Mr. Real.
Yeah, well, she had an opening, and I had something to share. So there we are. You were on time though, right?
I was.
Okay, good for you.
I'm wondering why now. Well, I know that there's certainly rules that I have to follow that not everyone else does. You don't have to, just put it in my face, Bill.
That's why you present on Saturday and I'm presenting on Friday night before everybody gets there. So Saturday, you'll be presenting at Sunstone. About what time will you be doing that?
10:25 a.m.
10:25 a.m. And so if you show up for the Friday late afternoon, stay for the early Sunday or early Saturday morning, you'll get your fill of Bill Reel and Radio Free Mormon. And we've been thinking about trying to do some sort of event, kind of like we did down here in Southern Utah, where folks can pay an amount, show up, and we can have 3 hours of really fun time with the two of us. And this is we're just in the very beginning of talking about this.
Yeah,
But we
it's
do
not
need
like
to-
it's less than 2 months away.
No, I know. So we got to get moving on it. So we do need to make some decisions. So to the audience, anybody who watches this podcast tonight, we'll talk about it again on Friday night. If anybody has a home available, if anybody knows of a location that would hold more people than a home, please
Some people
reach
have really
out.
big homes.
Some people do. And I've been to firesides with Thomas McConkey and oh my goodness, Wendy Jensen. Done things where at a home where she was at, and there were tons of people in a big home that had space for that. So if somebody has a really spacious home, if somebody knows of a locale that we could that would be affordable for the event, please let us know. Email us at Mormon Discussions with an S on the end, podcast with an S on the end at gmail.com. And we're hoping, I would think sometime in the next week or two, we really have to kind of nail this down and put some details in place. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. Otherwise, please register for Sunstone so that you can hang out with me and RFM there. And we're really excited to see each of you, just like we were the group that came down here to Southern Utah. So again, thanks to all of you who support us. RFM, if nothing else, we'll jump into it.
Let's.
All right, let's do that. So I'm going to go back to this, put that up on the stage. We don't want that. Let's get that off. Put this up on the stage. And I'll add that background. Okay. Let me take that comment down.
Bye, Kenny B.
There it is. Somebody else just sent something, so let me go to that.
Oh my gosh.
George Washington. Hey,
oh my gosh.
$50. Love you guys. So thank you very much for that as well.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you, George Washington.
Okay, so missing scroll. Joseph Smith and Joseph Smith's and Mormonism's claim, and most of us in the audience are going to know this, the beginning part of this conversation, but I think there's several things in tonight's show that people don't know, and I think some of the things towards the conclusion at the end haven't been shared generally with a wide audience, although scholars like Dan Vogel have made these connections. Translation. So a translation of some ancient records that have fallen into our hands from the catacombs of Egypt, purporting to be the writings of Abraham while he was in Egypt, called the Book of Abraham, written by his own hand upon papyrus. And I just want to note here, RFM, this is the church narrative originally. And when we all were in the church, when you joined in 78, when I joined in 96, the story you and I got was that there were some Egyptian papyri that came into Joseph's possession in 1835 in Kirtland, Ohio. Michael Chandler, we got the name told to us, the whole story.
Might have been July.
It was and we'll see that later. The papyri that Joseph Smith purchases from Michael Chandler, he tells everyone, including putting it in the scriptures, that these are the writings of Abraham while he was in Egypt, written by his own hand upon papyrus. That doesn't leave any room, by the way, for a catalyst or a missing scroll, but we go there nonetheless because this doesn't end up adding up.
Yeah, and Colby and I had talked about this on the last RFM show, dealing with a Light on Truth letter where he tries to pull the same kind of thing, which is, I don't know if he does, but we're talking about it because we're talking about apologists in general as well. But the whole idea is when you get there, right? We did. Talking about written by his own hand. And they want to say, well, this is like a book by, Stephen King, and you're reading the book, but, he didn't actually write it. He didn't write the damn thing you're reading. And I just go, yeah, that's a dumb argument. But as dumb as that argument is, it's completely overthrown by everything. This entire paragraph is written in order to make it clear beyond disputation that we're talking about these papyri that Abraham wrote on. They're ancient records. They've fallen into our hands for a price from the catacombs of Egypt, purporting to be the writings of Abraham while he was in Egypt, called the Book of Abraham, written by his own hand upon papyrus. And the next line is the Book of Abraham. I mean, how many ways can this person say the same thing?
And there isn't just one problem with this paragraph, with this introduction. First off, they no longer want to say it's a translation. They want to leave room for the catalyst theory, which we'll go into another time. But translation means transmission now, according to the church. The purporting to be the writings of Abraham turns out not to be true. Written by his own hand turns out to not be true, and written by his own hand on this papyrus turns out to not be true. And the church has had to adjust. So Warren Parrish, our good friend from the Kirtland Safety Society, who was the fall guy for all the money that either never existed or was removed from the bank, he is the only person to be on the record talking about the actual translation of the Book of Abraham. And here's what he says. He says, I have sat by his side, meaning Joseph Smith's side, and penned down the translation of the Egyptian hieroglyphics, his spelling, not mine, as he claimed to receive it by direct inspiration of heaven. Warren Parrish, 1838. Anyway, I'll leave that there. Here's go ahead. Oh, I can't hear you, RFM. I can't. Yep.
Excuse me.
No
the
worries.
funny thing is about Warren Parrish, okay, he has been excommunicated as of this date. Now, there is nothing in what he wrote there that sounds at all problematic. All he's saying is, as if he had been, say, Oliver Cowdery for the Book of Mormon. I have set by his side and pinned down the translation of the Egyptian hieroglyphics as he claimed to receive it. There's nothing controversial about this, except for the fact that they found the freaking papyrus and it's not the Book of Abraham. So now it can't be a translation.
Right.
So now what before they found the papyrus was totally the regular church line. This is what happened. Now it becomes controversial and it has to be dismissed by saying, oh, well, he had been excommunicated from the church by that point. So he is an apostate. He's an anti-Mormon. So, of course, he's going to lie that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Abraham from the Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Which makes no sense on a second level. Imagine Warren Parrish going, all right, I know it was the catalyst theory. I know it's a missing scroll that's written in Hebrew, but I'm going to turn this on its head. I'm going to say I have sat by his side and penned down the translation of the Egyptian hieroglyphics as he claimed to receive it by the direct inspiration of heaven. That'll do him in.
That's like asking for $1 million.
All right. So there's that. Okay. Crux of the problem. This is in the new article, by the way. So the church not only has the gospel topic essay, Book of Abraham translation. I don't remember the exact name. I think I have it maybe on the next slide, part of it. But they just put out one a month or so ago, and it's a fascinating read, by the way, and we should spend some time going into detail on that alone. Dan Vogel here, Parrish was hired as a scribe in late October. He thinks the entire Book of Mormon was
Book of Abraham. He means Book of Abraham.
Oh, yeah, he does. He
was
thinks the entire
in
Book of
July.
Abraham. Yeah, dictated. Because what that does is it allows the Kirtland Egyptian papers to be an afterthought rather than be part of the translation process and
Right.
work. Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so therefore, if this is true, which it's not, by which I mean Guy's theory, if Guy's theory is true and Warren Parrish was not hired as a scribe until October, months after the translation of the Book of Abraham had been completed, he must be a lying rogue to say such a thing.
Yep. So I would
think about this. Think about this. I'm so sorry.
No,
But
please.
think about this. Like you said, from Warren Parrish's point of view, I'm going to get Joseph Smith because I hate his guts. So what am I going to do? This is what he comes up with. It wasn't a controversy back then. It only became a controversy in retrospect. So what he's saying is not controversial at the time he's saying it. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan. But what he's saying is not controversial at the time he's saying it at all. There may be other things he said which are controversial. This is not one of them. But the only reason it's controversial is after the fact, when now John Gee has to have the entire Book of Abraham translated in July of 1835, before Warren Parrish is hired to be a scribe.
Yeah, and I'll just note it's ridiculous if they're going to make the argument. So Dan just pointed out he's hired in October, which which nails down the Kirtland Egyptian papers as having a connection to the Book of Abraham translation, and it does so clearly that Brian Hagglid acknowledges as such while working for the Joseph Smith Papers project and working for the church. And we'll see his commentary later as he steps away from all of that. And on some level, his perspective's deeply changed, although I think he's ambiguous enough so that he isn't taking significant heat from the church, but you will have no problem seeing clearly what he's trying to say. And he mentions Dan Vogel in that comment. But it would be preposterous to propose that Warren Parrish is claiming to be a scribe or scribe for the Book of Abraham translation when in fact he wasn't. That doesn't make any sense. And he, like you say, he's not saying anything here that's going to raise an eyebrow with anybody at the time.
He's an anti-Mormon trying to get Joseph Smith. Why is he saying, from Guy's point of view, that I was a scribe for him after and doing things that he'd already done?
Yeah,
I'm not getting it. I don't think that's a good argument, Guy.
Yeah. So we'll see all this as it unfolds tonight. The crux of the problem, again, everybody, please go read this Origins of the Book of Abraham.
And by the way, Bill, I'm not sure that I had fully digested that there's a new Gospel Topics essay on the Book of Abraham.
Yeah, one is on the translation and one is on the Origins. And the Origins is just as much crazy apologetic speak as I've ever seen. And so, maybe we do a show on that here in the near future and go into detail, because there's a lot there. I'll just share this one part here. So this is the last little paragraph of this section. I'm writing the crux of the problem. This is not what it says on the church's site.
Oh.
Both Latter-day Saint and non-Latter-day Saint Egyptologists agree that the characters on these fragments do not match the translation given in the Book of Abraham. Now, again, when this was given here, nobody argued with this. Every single member of the church clearly understood, including Joseph Smith, including Warren Parrish, that the papyri that we had came from the catacombs of Egypt. It was the writings of Abraham written by his own hand upon that papyri. And that Joseph was translating one roll, which is the Book of Abraham, and the other roll, which is the Book of Joseph. What a crazy claim to make. That
we're very lucky.
By coincidence, by luck, the Book of Abraham and the Book of Joseph both come into your hands.
It's an astonishing find.
Yeah. Everyone in the church in 1835, 1842, 1863, 1878, 1892, 1912, all the way up till the last 20 years, believed this literally. That right there. Okay. I just want to note, by the way, there's another little problem here, and we'll go into this later in detail. I show this slide again. Most of the papyri that were in Joseph's possession are now lost, though some fragments have survived.
How would they possibly know that?
It's also completely untrue, and we'll show that tonight.
But if it's most, then that means there's more room for the real Book of Abraham to still be around somewhere.
That's right. All you have to do is do wordplay, and you can create space for your apologetic reconciliation. So here is another section out of that Origins of the Book of Abraham. Most of the explanations Joseph published with the facsimiles do not match the interpretations of modern Egyptologists. By the way, if you're going to argue there's a missing scroll, you have to deal with those facsimiles. And they're trying to do it here, be honest and truthful to some extent, but also, again, leave some room. However, scholars have noted some parallels. There's 123 things Joseph Smith gets wrong, but Joseph Smith described the four figures, the canopic jars, in figure 6 of facsimile 2, as this earth and its 4 quarters. And there is a real far off tangent in Egyptology where the 4 canopic jars stand for the 4 directional winds. And that is the same thing as this. And hence we have a bullseye, and he's nailed it.
So here's where my brilliant idea came from, right when the show started, Bill. You ready?
Yep.
And I did this stuff as an apologist. It shames me to say. But yeah, when you start pointing out, that what they say right here, that most of the explanations don't match. However, the scholars, you can call John Gee a scholar, Scholars have noted some parallels, and then they give a couple of examples. Okay, this does not fit anywhere. This does not fit in any theory. This is not part of the missing scroll theory. This is not part of the catalyst theory. This is the bastard child of both of those theories, because if the catalyst theory is true, there shouldn't be any matches. And if there are, they don't make any difference, because Joseph Smith wasn't translating. It was catalyzing, right? On the other hand, if it's the lost scroll, the missing scroll theory is true, then they should all be lining up. You shouldn't have just a few here and there that look suspiciously like coincidence. And that's what I mean. These little paltry evidences, or even if you don't think they're paltry, it's all or nothing. There ain't no in between.
Yeah, 100%. So they're noting that the 4 canopic jars, which Joseph Smith said is this earth in its 4 quarters, has a ambiguous meaning somewhere off in Egyptology. Again, they are organ jars. The 4 canopic jars are represented by Egyptian gods, and in those jars, the deceased person's organs would be placed.
Organs.
And yet there's this far off meaning that it means the 4 winds, and that's close enough for them to go, the earth in its 4 quarters, that's a bullseye. The other says other scholars have similarly interpreted identical figures in the ancient Egyptian text. Facsimile 1 contains a crocodile deity swimming in what Joseph Smith called the firmament over our heads.
Sobek.
And scholars have similarly identified Egyptian conceptions of heaven as a heavenly ocean. Those are the same thing. But again,
I know what the name of the damn crocodile deity is. It's Sobek or it's Sebek. And this is what Mormonism does to a person. I remember early on in my getting to know Robert Rittner, rest in peace. I was talking to him, and I was trying to express to him that I don't know much about history. I don't know much about Egyptology. He's the master of disaster. And I told him, I said, well, everything I know about Egyptology, I learned from the Book of Abraham. And I meant that seriously, but understanding that he would take it in a funny way. But, I mean, is it common that people out there just happen to know that the crocodile deity of the Egyptians was Sobek, or also called Sebek? Or is it only crazy-ass Mormon apologists? Are we the only ones who know this other than Egyptologists?
To a similar vein, I had a guy I used to work with back in Ohio. He was an older guy, and he was just the meanest man. He was just a bully and really rude to me over and over and over and over again. And one day the office got into a conversation, and somehow the Great Chicago Fire came up. And there was a conversation like, when did that happen? And he came out of his office and he walked up all arrogant. And he was like, that happened in 18, he gave some early year in 1800,
Was it 73? Because it would be late, right?
1871, I believe.
Okay.
And I said, no, that's not right. It's in the late 1800s. It's not the early 1800s.
He said something that was way off.
Yes, he was way off. And because of Mormonism, I knew when the Great Chicago Fire had happened. Okay. And so there's that. Okay, let's move on from this.
There's 2012. No, wait, that's the TV series. Hang on a second. I didn't know they did a TV series about the Chicago Fire.
October 1871. It's right there on this slide.
1871. Bravo.
After Joseph Smith died in 1844, the Egyptian artifacts, there were 4 mummies, I believe. We'll debate the number of scrolls, but I think we can clearly narrow it down in tonight's episode. They all remained with his family. His mother, Lucy Mack Smith, often displayed them in Nauvoo for curious visitors. When Lucy passed away in 1856, Joseph's widow, Emma, and her family sold the collection to a man named Abel Combs, who took possession of 4 mummies along with the accompanying papyri. Abel Combs eventually distributed parts of the collection. 2 of the mummies and some of the papyri were sent to the St. Louis Museum around 1856. By the early 1860s, they found their way to the Chicago Museum, where they were put on display. Among the items was a long papyrus scroll, which many presumed to be the source of the Book of Abraham. But in October 1871, the Great Chicago Fire tore through the city. By the way, some lady got blamed for milking her cows in the nighttime by lantern. But the real story is she was in bed at the time. She took the fall for that, was persecuted terribly. If you can imagine the whole city burning down and, the old lady getting blamed from her farm on the outskirts of town.
Well, she was Irish, I think. So it's
I
okay.
watched a couple of documentaries on the Chicago Fire as a side note in interest for this episode. And I would encourage anybody who's interested. The Great Chicago Fire is a cool historical event on its own. So
yeah, Mrs. O'Leary's cow. I thought she was Irish.
Yeah.
Yes, but guess what? I got to ask you a question, okay?
Please.
It has not escaped my notice that you pronounce Chicago with a hard ch. Is that because you lived in Ohio? I mean, you lived a lot closer to that city. I'm wondering if it's a dialect or something.
I pronounce so many things wrong that we'll just go with whatever you say it is.
All you have to say is that's how they pronounce it in Chicago. In Chicago, man.
And you would have believed me.
No, but I would have played along.
Okay, good.
I would have had that much grace.
Chicago with a SH sound.
Yeah, that's how I've always heard it. That's how Frank Sinatra sings it.
Good. That's I'll just create a deniable plausibility here.
Perfect.
And we can move on. So, but in October 1871, the Great Chicago Fire tore through the city. The museum burned to the ground, and with it, the remaining Joseph Smith papyri were believed to have been destroyed. But not all of Joseph Smith's papyri were lost in the fire. So, in fact, in all likelihood, very little of it was destroyed. In 1966, the University of Utah researcher named Dr. Aziz Atiyah was exploring the archives of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York when he came across a set of Egyptian papyrus fragments that looked surprisingly familiar. Among them was the drawing unmistakably identical to facsimile 1 from the Book of Abraham. Unbeknownst to the museum, they had been holding on to pieces of the Joseph Smith papyri for years. In 1967, the Met officially transferred 11 fragments to the LDS Church, including the original illustration used for facsimile 1. And I just want to note here, I'm going to make this a little bigger so we go down to the bottom. What I want to note here is 2 different documents that I had that showed what was remaining. They both say the same thing, but I'll go with the one on the left. This is an old dialogue article. The one on the right is a more modern website. The 11 fragments, as now mounted, are the surviving parts of 3 ancient papyri, none of which is complete. 1, the Book of the Dead, belonging to the lady Teshimmen. I don't know if you're going to know that pronunciation better than I am.
Well, no, I've never lived in Egypt. I don't know.
And whose mother was Skahantz.
Where is it written? I'm so sorry.
This is in the middle left.
Middle left.
Yep.
Okay.
So the handwriting dates to the second half of the Ptolemaic period, perhaps around 100 BC. This is papyrus that Joseph Smith believed to contain the Book of Joseph. The second one is the Book of...
I see. T-S-H-E. That's Chinnaman.
Yes.
Chinnaman. Like it's in Chicago.
There you go. So
it is Ptolemaic, though.
Cool. The Book of the Dead, belonging to the female musician Neferenub, and I don't know these things well. I know these have different names to them. So there's the Amenhotep, for instance, Amenhotep, and that ends up playing into this as well. So then there's the third one, the breathing permit, belonging to the priest of Hor, son of the priest of...
There's our Book of Abraham.
Yes. And I don't know those names, but at least 4 fragments are now mounted.
Yeah, those aren't easy to say.
AS4, the handwriting of the late Ptolemaic or early Roman period about the time of Christ. Joseph Smith thought that this papyrus contained the Book of Abraham. And the one on the right says the same thing. And then I'll just put us back and just explain. We're going to show the pieces that they had. The 2 biggest pieces they had are displayed there at the bottom. And even in, it's weird, right? RFM, the church wants to hold on to room for a missing scroll and room for the catalyst theory.
Mm-hmm.
But in their Joseph Smith Papers Project book on the Book of Abraham, they definitively call the one on the left the Book of Joseph, and the one on the right the Book of Abraham papyrus.
And so you know how they do that, right?
Well, they want to have it both ways, but go ahead.
Oh, I thought it was just because that they can identify them based upon the historical descriptions of them. The Book of Abraham's easy, right? Because we've still got facsimile 1.
Yeah.
And besides, it's not like there aren't a ton of these. They're all kind of the same, and they start with the same picture, which we have as facsimile 1. Then they end with the same picture, which we have as facsimile 3, the presentation scene. And to God, I think it's Horus there, or Osiris. I always get him confused. I think it's Osiris. And so you're going to heaven as long as you have passed the tests that have been set for you. So having said that, they know what these are. They know what that is. That's going to be the one that Joseph Smith used as the Book of Abraham. But the Book of Joseph is the other one that is the other roll, the other papyri. There were 2 papyri and then the fragments. And I think they're very clear, and I think you've gotten all the sources together, that there were just 2 papyri. You can't make a third papyri. There's only 2 papyri. Everybody agrees, and the one was Abraham and the other one was Joseph. And then people such as Oliver Cowdery wrote down descriptions of what was on the Book of Joseph, because the Book of Joseph has different kinds of pictures on it. And we can match what was written about them with the pictures, and voila, it's obviously this was what was thought to be the Book of Joseph, which was the Book of the Dead, right?
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned Robert Rittner a few minutes ago, and we say on the critical side of Mormonism, we say Robert Rittner is the Egyptologist of all Egyptologists of his day. He is the guy that everyone points to. And
of this period, yeah.
Yeah. And
which is the Ptolemaic period.
Yes. And I'll just note, John Gee and Kerry Molstein and Stephen Smoot want Robert Rittner to be full of shit.
Oh, yeah.
But this week, I emailed 5 Egyptologists. 3 of them got back to me. Guess what all 3 have in common in terms of trying to help me answer some of these questions?
They all referred you to Robert Rittner's writings on the Book of Abraham.
They all said, I'll give you my 2 cents, and we'll share one of them here. I'll give you my 2 cents, but you should probably refer to Robert Rittner. He is the expert on this stuff. So just FYI, folks, Robert Rittner is the guy. So there's that. Okay, so we've got this one. Missing papyri. A total of 3 facsimiles were drawn and eventually printed in the Book of Abraham. Only the first was found among the rediscovered papyri. So 2 of the facsimiles are missing. And we'll show those later too. We do have what's on them. We have it because they did reproductions of them at the time that they were translating. So we have them, but the original is gone. Therefore, we know that there were 2 others, but the papyri containing them remains missing. The missing facsimiles are as follows. Facsimile 2, the hypocephalus, which was part of the Book of the Dead belonging to Shashank. And facsimile 3, this is part of the breathing permit belonging to Hor. Much of the breathing permit of Hor scroll was rediscovered, but this piece was not. And by the way, the piece here, facsimile 3, that's missing off of the Book of Abraham papyrus is the piece in which you and I both believe that Anubis was there in his character, and that was altered in the woodcut by Reuben Hedlock. And it's quite convenient that of all the Book of Abraham papyrus, this is missing. I'll just note that. Another part of the breathing permit of Hor is missing. This section would fit between the breathing permit of Hor papyrus we do have and facsimile 3, which would have appeared at the end of the scroll. And I'll just note, this is Robert Rittner who made this connection. And we'll show some data on this. And I really apologize. This might be a really long episode. But later on, we'll talk about the Chris Smith, and I forget the other gentleman's name, but I've worked with Chris Smith before on podcast stuff, so I know him.
And I'm forgetting his name too. I apologize.
The other gentleman's a physicist, and he really is the mathematical genius who did all the work. But they came up with the length of the scroll based on the way the fibers went together in the papyrus. It was Rittner who came along and said this document could very well have, and Dan Vogels who told me this just yesterday or day before, but that Rittner showed that there could be 2 more columns of Egyptian characters that could be possibly missing. And that's what they're referring to here.
Yeah.
And then
is it Jenkins, by the way?
I don't think it's Jenkins.
Okay. And by the way, all he's saying is, look, here's what we have. We have facsimile 1 on the papyrus. We've got these other parts then in a standard breathing text. And a breathing text is basically a poor man's Book of the Dead. And there was another Book of the Dead that was found. That was the other one. That was the Book of Joseph. That's why it has a bunch more. It's more ornate. It's longer. But this is a book of breathings. It's standard. So we know what the language is going to be. We know where the language stops as we're reading right to left. So we know how much is supposed to be there before you get to the final facsimile 3 end of the book of breathings. And so he's saying maybe 2, did you say possibly 3 more columns of text, and then you would have the end, and that's it.
Yep. And then a fragment from the Book of the Dead belonging to Amenhotep. We know this papyrus existed because characters from it appear in a document written by Smith scribes titled Valuable Discovery of Hidden Records. In other words, they have this other papyrus. They take characters from it. They do write them down, like in the Kirtland Egyptian papers. And later scholars, Rittner included, can look at those characters and go, I know exactly where this belongs. This belongs on the Book of the Dead belonging to Amenhotep.
Right, because his name's on it.
Yeah.
They're not just guessing or anything. They have a fragment with his name on it. Same with Hor or Horus, which is the one for the Book of Abraham. That's the breathing permit of Hor, which is short for Horus, and he's named for the god.
Yeah. And I would say, by the way, I think the Book of Abraham is the most complex issue in Mormonism to discuss so that everybody knows what everything that's being talked about. And it is difficult. So don't hesitate correcting me at any point about any of this. You really do know this stuff better than I do. Okay, so the big problem.
The other thing that's confusing sometimes, Bill, for me, is the fact that you have 2 scrolls, and then there are several fragments. One of the things that makes it confusing is the way they publish the Book of Abraham. They have the hypocephalus in the middle as facsimile 2, when it's not part of the same papyrus. This was one of the fragments that was over here. Joseph Smith added it to the story.
Yep, let me say this. It might help to understand that what came to Joseph Smith was 4 mummies. And if you can picture, each one of those mummies has its own set of documents. One mummy has a hypocephalus under its head that they use. One mummy has the Book of the Dead that is the Book of Joseph. The other one has the Book of Breathings of whatever. It has the other papyrus, which is, and I'm saying those backwards, by the way. But each mummy has its own set of documents that Joseph Smith is then taking and assigning meaning to, and some of the things he's overlapping. So, for instance, he's taking the hypocephalus from one mummy, combining it to the Book of Abraham papyrus of another mummy, and calling it the Book of Abraham. And it's confusing because it really needs to be separate documents. The hypocephalus belongs to one body, and the Book of Abraham papyrus belongs to another. Right. And so facsimile 1 and facsimile 3 come off of the one mummy that the Book of Abraham papyrus is from. The hypocephalus belongs to a different body and doesn't belong with that other document. And Joseph is mixing and matching things. We'll even see that he is taking the hypocephalus, which has a lacuna on it. I learned that from you, RFM, this week. And then he takes characters from the other documents he has in order to fill in the missing portions or the lacuna of the hypocephalus. And we'll see that here later tonight as well.
Liz Lambert is asking, what's a breathing permit?
Please, you answer that.
A breathing permit. Okay, this is my understanding. Once again, everything I know about Egyptology, I learned from the Book of Abraham. So here we go. A breathing permit is a religious document that if you were wealthy enough and literate enough back in ancient Egypt, you would want to be buried with this. This has the directions, and if there's incantations needed, whatever it is that's special that's needed on this scroll to get you from where you're buried or entombed over into the next world and to enter into heaven. So it's very important, okay? But it's all from, obviously, an Egyptian point of view because it's their religion, right? And it's been around a long time, especially as of the Ptolemaic period, which is only a couple 300 years before Christ, and there it goes on after that for several hundred years. Probably at least up until Cleopatra. She might have been the last one. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that's why it's so important, okay? Now, if you're more wealthy, you can get a Book of the Dead. And a Book of the Dead is also a scroll, but it's a much nicer scroll. It's more expensive. It's all about expense, right? But you can have the Book of the Dead, and that's going to really, it gives you spells in it to help you conquer and take care of any bad things that you meet. It's all incredibly interesting. Okay, so you got a breathing permit or a Book of Breathing, same thing, is my understanding. Then there's a Book of the Dead, which is a notch up. Then if you want better, then you can have a coffin scroll. Is that what's called? I think it's called a coffin scroll. Okay. I could be wrong, but you have it written along the coffin. So it's actually not a scroll anymore. It's inscribed in your coffin. And then if you're really, really wealthy, like you're a king, and you can have a pyramid, or is it a coffin text? I think it's probably called a coffin text. It's not a scroll. You can get a pyramid. Then you can have the pyramid text, and it's on the walls of the interior of the pyramid in your tomb. And my understanding is it's basically all the same thing, but these are, differences in expense.
This is their religion. They have their own rituals for helping somebody get to the desired place in the afterlife. And the Book of the Dead or the breathing permit are about displaying the words of the rituals, the actions of the rituals, so that the person who's been mummified has a cleaner path to getting back to the heaven of the Egyptian religion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's where you want to be.
Okay, so when scholars translated these fragments in the late 1960s, they confirmed what the text actually said, and it wasn't what Joseph Smith claimed. The papyri dealt with Egyptian religious practices and rituals for the dead, not the life of the biblical patriarch. Even the facsimiles that Joseph had interpreted as scenes from Abraham's life turned out to be routine funerary art. So Joseph says these are the writings of Abraham found in the catacombs of Egypt, written by his own hand upon papyrus. When we find those fragments, it is definitely not that. And so the church has got to come to grips with dealing with, in the 1960s, is the first time anybody goes, we're going to need a different solution for this problem.
By the way, talking about a big disappointment.
Yeah.
I don't think this is as big as the Kirtland banking fiasco, but I think it's close. Can you imagine being a member of the church at this time and having a solid testimony of the Book of Abraham and all things Mormon, and they find the papyrus that you had thought had been destroyed in the Chicago fire, and they find 11 fragments. And when we say fragments, it's not something that just means little things. It can be little things, but also it can be quite large. They're just not the whole thing. It's something less than the whole is called a fragment. And that's why some of them, like one of the fragments has almost all of, it has almost all of facsimile one, and in addition, a little bit extra around on the sides.
Yeah.
So they can be quite large.
And we will represent and show everything we have and represent what we know is missing.
Right. And then they translated it, and this is the moment, Bill. This is the moment that Mormonism comes into its own and is proven to the world to be true and Joseph Smith to be a prophet.
Wouldn't it have been amazing if they would have taken those documents, sent them out to Egyptologists, and they came back and said, these are the writings of Abraham, maybe written by his own hand?
Yeah. I would have been very disappointed. I would have been disappointed then if I'd been a member, as I was when I was a kid and I got the Superman outfit for Christmas and found out I couldn't fly.
This would have been crushing if you and I lived in the 1960s, 1967. By the way, here is the New York Times newspaper.
Yep.
When that happened.
Well, no, this is 1913.
Oh, I'm sorry. This was a later moment. I'm trying to remember what was
13 or 12.
1913. No, 1912.
12.
December 29th, 1912.
Yeah, what this was is the parchment, the papyrus had not been found as of this point. But the Book of Abraham has always had a weak spot, and the weak spot is the 3 facsimiles and the interpretations that Joseph Smith gave for the different figures in the facsimiles. And that's what this is about.
Yeah, because the facsimiles are represented. By 1912, the Rosetta Stone discovery had made its way over into the Western Hemisphere.
Well, yeah, way before then, yeah.
But at this point, it's very clear cut that those facsimiles do not mean what Mormonism claimed they did.
Yeah, and that looks like the front page. That's got to be embarrassing for the church. Sure. There's all these points, and a lot of them have to do with the Book of Abraham in one way or another, whether it's the Book of Abraham or, I don't know, priesthood restrictions on people with dark skin, which may or may not be kind of related to the Book of Abraham, if you know what I'm talking about. I think it's chapter 2. So anyway, and that doesn't you don't hear chapter 2 getting quoted a lot. Book of Abraham, usually it goes to either chapter 1 or chapter 3, and that's it. It's like it doesn't have a second, fourth, or fifth chapter. So you got this situation, and you have all these times where there are faith challenging situations. That's the fairest way I can put it. That come up in the LDS church, and they come up on a regular basis. And I've lived through several of them. I didn't live through this one, the one in 1912. I didn't live through the one in 1967. But I think that there were a lot of people who said, I got to go. This is too much for me, and I think I'm leaving the church over this one.
By the way, Adam Clark, according to Dan Vogel, makes a similar connection to the four beasts of Revelation, and the fact that there were 4 canopic jars. It seems like a really kind of easy connection for Joseph Smith to make. By the way, you'll see behind me those 3 figures with the purple light behind them up at the top. Those are 3 of the 4 canopic jars. I'll grab one of them.
Right. Which one do you have? The man, the lion, the jackal,
I have this one.
The lion.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, that's the person. Yeah, that's the man.
Okay, so there's that. A listener got these for me.
What was a baboon? That was it. Man, jackal, lion, baboon.
Yeah, this is
that's jackal.
This is Anubis, I think.
Yeah, that's jackal.
Yep. So there's Anubis, and
who else knows what the hell the 4 canopic jars are?
I've got the bird.
Oh, it's a bird.
Yeah.
So that's a hawk, probably.
Yeah.
That's Horus. Well, not me, obviously.
There you go.
I got that goofed up. I thought one was a lion.
All right. I hope I don't break any of those. Okay. So, all right. Missing scroll theory. I'm going to take Dan's comment down. Thank you, Dan. Birth of the missing scroll theory. So by the late 1960s, LDS defenders faced a dilemma. The papyrus fragments that had survived and resurfaced didn't match the Book of Abraham at all. It would have just been great if the thing Joseph said as an introduction just matched what we discover, but it's not the case.
It's like, damn it, Joseph, you had one job.
Get it right.
And now, I mean, look at all this. I'm sorry, it's not Friday, it's Wednesday. I got to keep it under control. Look at all of the work, the mountains of work and effort and labor that apologists have had to do on the Book of Abraham just because Joseph Smith couldn't translate it right.
Yeah. To explain this discrepancy, they proposed that Joseph Smith must have had much more papyrus than what we now possess, and that the actual source of the Book of Abraham was on a different portion of papyri that has since been lost, likely destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire. This idea came to be known as the missing scroll theory. Now, there's 2 missing scroll theories, and we will account for both of them. But one is that the papyrus we do have it's just much longer.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Book of Abraham portion is missing conveniently.
Yeah, well.
And then the other one is that it must have been some other role in the collection.
Yes. It's a missing scroll or a missing portion of the same scroll. And the fact that there's 2 different theories makes it twice as likely to be correct.
Okay. Evidence for the missing material sufficient to account for the Book of Abraham. William S. West in 1837 said these records were torn by being taken from the roll of embalming salve which contained them, and some parts entirely lost. But Smith is to translate the whole by divine inspiration, and that which is lost, like Nebuchadnezzar's dream, can be interpreted as well as that which is preserved, in a larger volume than the Bible will be required to contain them. So this quote, I only show this quote to display that it would make sense to the person who's viewing all of this, that if it's going to fill a volume larger than the Bible, it must then be a piece of papyrus or parchment that is so big and long and so expansive that it would have enough material on it that it thinks that could be translated into something as large or larger than the Bible itself.
But that's because each character in Joseph Smith's mind represents a paragraph.
Yeah, and we'll see that, by the way. That is true.
Also, it's interesting that apparently, according to this William West person, the representation was made by somebody about Joseph. And I think it's quite reasonable to conclude this is correct. that there are gaps, right? There are things that have been torn away. There are lacunae in the papyrus, but that Joseph Smith is going to, by interpretation, by revelation, just like Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Remember the story. I think it's Daniel chapter 2. When he has a dream, he wakes up. He can't remember it. He can't remember the dream. All he knows is he was terrified by it. I like that story because I can relate. But he goes to Daniel, to the soothsayers, right? And he says, not only do you have to tell me the interpretation of my dream, you have to tell me what the dream was too. Because they can't remember. So by the power of course, they screw it up and they get whatever bad happens to them and their family and their poodles. But then finally, Daniel's able to tell him what his dream was and the interpretation. So by inspiration, you can tell somebody what was there before, even though it's not there now. It's the idea. And when we looked at it, and you looked at it, Joseph Smith did fill it in, but he filled it in using different parts of the papyrus. So if there was something that was missing, he would just take something that was there and copy it in, so it wasn't missing anymore. And in at least one place, if not two or three, I'll say several. That's a safe word. In several places where there were lacunae, he would fill them in, not with anything Egyptian, but with a separate project which he had been working on earlier, coming up with symbols which are not Egyptian symbols to restore the original language of Adam.
There you go.
But none of it was Egyptian coming by inspiration. It was either Egyptian from somewhere else on the papyrus, or it was his own alphabet that he'd been working on.
Yeah, and there's so much to this. I mean, there's things that aren't in here tonight, but I don't think I included in this slideshow. Not only does he translate the facsimiles, not only does he take characters from other documents and put them to fill in the lacuna of the hypocephalus, not only is he, doing all the things he's doing with the facsimiles and with the Book of Abraham and claiming he's got the Book of Joseph, but he comes out with like a numbering system too, by taking these Egyptian characters and symbols and creates his own numbering system. And some point in the next 2 months, we'll put that up on the screen and show you, but it's crazy. There's this one too, the Friends Weekly Intelligencer.
Yeah.
This is 10th month, 7th day, 1846. And then there's a little section out of this that I then enlarged. So this says that's the front page. This came out of like page 3 or something. So after we had
September, right?
Yeah. 10th month. So October.
Well, it says 9th here. Would it say 10th somewhere else?
This is, this all came out of this paper, Illinois 9th month, 1846. This is a correspondence. I think they're resharing something.
Okay.
So it says, after we had obtained all the information we could at the temple, we visited the mother of the prophet, a respectable looking old lady who has 4 mummies for exhibition, who she says were king and queen and their son and daughter, and gives the names of each. She produced a black looking roll, which she told us was papyrus, found upon the breast of the king. Now, this is of note because this is late. This is after the death of Joseph Smith. And during Joseph Smith's life, they took the roll that was the Book of Abraham papyrus, and to make it easier to work with, they cut it into sections, glued it on like a display piece, put glass on top, and had it in sections. So this guy, again, this is evidence for a missing scroll. This guy is claiming that while the pieces we have were all cut up and displayed, there was some other roll that was a black roll that Lucy Mack Smith said was papyrus, found upon the breast of the king, part of which the prophet had unrolled and read, and she had pasted the deciphered sheets on the leaves of a book which she showed us. Now, so it's a strange thing. In one hand, he's saying she produced the black roll, and in another place, he's saying that this was cut up and displayed, and it can be confusing.
Well, what she's describing is the Joseph scroll. It's the Book of the Dead, not the Abraham scroll. And when I say that, she says the roll was as dark as the bones of the mummies and bore very much the same appearance, but the open sheets were exceedingly like thin parchment. Okay. There were birds, fishes, and fantastic looking people. That's the Joseph scroll. That's the Book of the Dead.
Which even if apologists would never claim that's the Book of Abraham either, because we have it, we can translate it, and it also isn't anything connected to biblical Christianity. So there's this black roll, which is talk about as you're pointing out, Book of Joseph, but sometimes this quote is brought up because there's this big black roll and that's unaccounted for, and that's just not the case.
That's amazing. It's like they're a kindergartner trying to do a magic trick. You ever had a little kid, maybe you do a magic trick for them and they go, wow, how did that coin come out of my ear? That's incredible. And then they start trying to do things, and it's just so obvious what they're doing. There's 2 scrolls and they're trying to make the second scroll into a third scroll. And they're saying, look, no, actually there's 3 scrolls, because see the second scroll that didn't get cut up, that's over here now.
Yeah.
That's all they're doing.
Yep. And then here's the fun one. This is the one they really rely on. The other 2 are so ambiguous that they're just not strong at all for anything.
Oh, the part where Hugh Nibbli unfortunately committed perjury.
Yeah. And this
he wasn't under oath.
It gets worse than Hugh Nibbli. We're about ready to bring Kerry Molstein and John Gee into this conversation. So Hugh Nibbli claims that Joseph had lots of papyri, not just the fragments we have. Hugh Nibbli alleged that when Joseph Smith unrolled one of the papyri in the mansion house, it stretched through 2 rooms. The story was repeated with relish by Hugh Nibbli as evidence of how much papyrus had gone missing. And I just want to note, this happens in the dialogue article Phase 1. The Journal of Mormon Thought, number 3, I don't know how the numbering system on these work, but number 2, summer of 1968, 101. I went and found it. Here's what I've got. I'm going to start with the first full sentence. Who pasted the things together? Who cut them up? We are told that the papyri were in beautiful condition when Joseph got them. By the way, that will come into play when we talk about the snout of Anubis, and making the argument that facsimile 3 was almost certainly in phenomenal shape when Joseph Smith worked with it. And here, Hugh Nibbli would at least in some way agree with us. We are told that the papyri were in beautiful condition when Joseph Smith got them, and that one of them, they still did have lacuna, by the way. They still did have missing portions. And we know that for sure because of facsimile 1 at the very minimum. Because Joseph Smith draws in the stick figure face looking at the camera, breaking the 4th wall.
I know, but look, there's always a question. Well, maybe there isn't, and maybe Dan will tell us. But I think there's a question as to whether any or all of these lacuna, these missing pieces, were missing when they came into Joseph Smith's possession, or whether he changed them. He took them out himself because he wanted to improve upon them through revelation or whatever means, and possibly having a jackal head in facsimile 1. Okay, I mean, where are you going to go with that? I don't know. There's not a lot of story arc there for Joseph. So he could, I'm not saying this is what happened, he could have removed it and put in the human head, which is just the inverse of the head of the person who's on the couch.
Yep. Okay, so we are told that the papyri were in beautiful condition when Joseph Smith got them. One of them, when unrolled on the floor, extended through 2 rooms of the mansion house. Those we have today are mounted on paper, showing maps of the Kirtland area, but that suggests that the mounting took place only after the Kirtland period, when all thought of returning to Kirtland was given up, and the precious maps, and it goes on. And that's interesting.
Quite a conclusion to reach from that evidence.
Yeah, here's the cool thing.
He's really in the tank, you can tell.
Yeah, and there may be some truth to that, but the important part is that he is the very first person on the written record in any historical documentation who says that when the papyrus was rolled out, it took 2 rooms for that to roll out. That's how long it was.
Right, and this is 1968. This is some of the first stuff he's writing about the scrolls, which have just been found and just been translated, and he was part of that process as well, I think, at some point in there with the translation. But already, he's making room for the missing scroll theory.
Yep.
That's the whole purpose of this story. And now what Bill's is going to tell you about this story is going to blow your mind.
Yeah, I'll just say there's, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, RFM, Dan Vogel, anyone else in the chat. When you go to this article, there is no footnote. There is no explanation from where this comes from. There's no place that we know. It is, Dan Vogel here says it's possible Joseph Smith removed part of facsimile 1, which, by the way, would help in the whole Anubis problem. If there was a jackal head on facsimile 1, there almost certainly would have been a jackal head on facsimile 3, and I'll make that argument at a later date. But it would help if he wants those two characters to be different people to get rid of any identifying marks that they're both the same jackal-headed figure.
By the way, Dan Vogel agreeing with me is not two scholars coming to the same conclusion independently. It's me showing that I remember what I learned from Dan.
Yeah, there you go. When I look in this article by Hugh Nibbli in Dialogue, there is no footnote. I can't find any place where he says where that comes from.
Suspicious, isn't it?
Yeah, but we do get somebody telling us where it comes from. So
this is an important story for the missing scroll hypothesis.
Yeah.
You would think he would have it footnoted.
You would think so, but Hugh Nibbli was famous for putting either no footnotes, or if he did put a citation down, when people would later on go to find that citation, it wasn't correct, and they could then no longer locate what it was he was talking about. Because he claimed it was in a place and it wasn't in the place he said it was.
In French or Latin or German or whatever.
Yeah. So Hugh Nibbli was famous for at least appearing to make up details.
Yeah, I got a story about that too. So are you saying this is one of those?
So yes, I think so. And again, I want to be corrected, but so this is the article here. This is the cover page of it. Hugh Nibbli, Joseph Smith, Egyptian papyri, translation, interpretations, phase 1. You can go find this online. You can read all of Hugh Nibbli's work. His work is definitely worth less than model cars and collector comic books today.
It's so sad, because why does there have to be a phase 1? Why does there have to be this article at all?
Yeah.
Why can't Joseph Smith just freaking translate Egyptian like he said he could?
Yeah, why not?
And why is it that when he doesn't, people think the burden's on them to have to prove that he's still a prophet when he's just proven that he's not?
This gets worse though, RFM. So Carrie Molstein writes a paper where he says, we are told that the papyri were in beautiful condition. No, this is maybe the same thing. We are told the papyri were in beautiful condition when Joseph got them, that one of them, when unrolled on the floor, extended through 2 rooms of the mansion house. Here's the article by Molstein.
Okay.
Egyptian papyri in the Book of Abraham, a faithful Egyptological point of view. It can't just be an Egyptological point of view, because that would point the Book of Abraham being false. You need a faithful Egyptological point of view. In this, here's what he says in his footnote, number 35. Some puzzles. Moreover, Hugh Nibbli recalls his father being told by Joseph Smith's nephew, Joseph F. Smith.
Objection, Your Honor.
It gets worse. It gets worse. Let me get past this one. So this is the telephone game. We're on the 4th person by now. Hugh Nibbli recalls his father being told by Joseph Smith's nephew, Joseph F. Smith, that when the prophet worked on the scroll in the mansion house, it was long enough to extend through 2 rooms. He couldn't be misremembering that it was just 2 rolls, or, this is the 4th person. It's got to be what it says.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
I'm sorry, you're probably going to get to it. The mansion house. Isn't the mansion house in Nauvoo?
The mansion house is in Nauvoo.
Wasn't Hugh Nibbli talking about Kirtland?
No. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and again, someone can correct me, Smith starts the translation in 35, but by the time it's published, it's 1842. And it's published in, I believe, in the Times and Seasons. It might be the Messenger and Advocate, but I think it's the Times and Seasons.
I believe so.
And it's in Nauvoo. And at that point, that's when Lucy Mack Smith is displaying these things, and people are coming through the mansion house to see this stuff. And so the other strange problem with this is, by this time, if it is in Nauvoo, it would have been already cut up in underneath display cases. It's not like you're pulling the roll out anymore and unrolling it across tables. Of course, if you have a missing scroll, that scroll wasn't preserved. That's another thing too, by the way. The roll that is the Book of Abraham, the important thing that you've given as scripture to your people, you leave as a roll and it gets more and more disintegrated by wear and tear. The pieces that are not important to this, you display under glass to protect them from any further damage. That's also a strange thing.
Right, because of course, you would take the things that were important, and those are the things you would preserve and make them so that they can be hung on the wall.
Yeah.
As in the picture, the painting with Lucy Mack sitting in the chair.
Yeah, but this gets way worse than this. So now I read Carrie Molstein's footnote and I go, that's the first time I get the source for Hugh Nibbli's statement. But I want to get it from the horse's mouth. So I want to go find John Gee's Some Puzzles. By the way, it's not titled.
I see.
Well, let me see here. I think it's maybe 2 more left. So let's see.
By the way, Spin has been trying to make sure everybody understands that Joseph F. Smith, the purported ultimate or an original source of this, would have been like 4 years old at the time.
Yeah, he's just a tiny little kid, unlikely to remember much of anything. So
he was precocious.
There's that. A 3-year-old kid, and he's a 3-year-old kid giving information through 4 people, and this is what we hang our hat on because we don't have anything else to hang our hat on. This is it.
It fits our theory, damn it. We're desperate.
We need something. All right, the long roll versus fragments. I want to see here. Let me see if I go back to. I am missing. I thought I had this. I'll just say it then because I don't have the piece. I wanted to show this. John Gee's Some Puzzles. There is a written transcript of the talk on Fair Mormon. There is a video you can go on YouTube and watch. It's called something longer than that, but Some Puzzles is part of the title. And when you listen to this, there is no, I couldn't find anything in the transcript and the written remarks. I didn't listen to the whole audio version because it's John Gee. And in the written transcript, there's no comment about this note. I couldn't find that. So if somebody does see it, please send it to me. It would at least show that Gee is referencing Hugh Nibbli and giving a source for it. It's almost like this whole thing was just created out of whole cloth, as Elder Holland would say.
It was kind of like that. Were you making fun of the way that Elder Holland talks?
No, I'm stammering for a minute because I don't have the slide I thought I did. But
you said whole cloth.
Yeah, well, whole cloth, because that's what Elder Holland does say in the talk going under, around, and through the Book of Mormon.
Oh, okay.
But I just want to note, John Gee's the first one to tell us where Hugh Nibbli got this. Hugh Nibbli doesn't tell us. And then supposedly we're supposed to believe John Gee that he spoke to Hugh Nibbli sometime way late in some conversation in recent years. John Gee finally decides to tell us where Hugh Nibbli got this and unveil for the first time ever where this came from. It's such a strange thing. There is no original source for this claim. Hugh Nibbli, who heard it from Preston Nibbli, who heard it from President Smith, who was recalling a time when he was 5 years old or younger. Exactly.
Never happened.
Yeah, no. It's one of these, and this is it. A imposed data point that seems highly unlikely and isn't sourced well is the crux of their entire argument for a missing scroll. It's the strongest point they make.
And they had to make it up to have this piece of evidence.
Yeah. The long roll versus fragments. Apologists attempt to convey that early saints often distinguish between the long roll that once existed but is now lost in the smaller pieces that have been cut up and placed under glass. For example, Lucy Mack Smith's source we just presented a few slides ago. Even the church's official materials nod to this possibility. 2014 Gospel Topics essay stated that only a small portion of the papyri survive, and eyewitnesses spoke of a much longer roll. It's not true. Hugh Nibbli speaks of a much longer roll. Hugh Nibbli says he, again, according to John Gee, he gets it from Preston Nibbli, who gets it from Joseph F. Smith, who's a little kid seeing Joseph Smith do this.
And there was only one witness, but now it's witnesses.
Yeah.
And now they don't even give the source.
Yeah, no, there never was a source.
What a tangled web we weave. I think the source appears with Hugh Nibbli.
Yep. Because so much of the original material is gone, the essay concludes, it's not possible to determine the relationship between the surviving papyri in the published Book of Abraham text. In other words, we can't rule out the idea. It's always plausible deniability, right? There's always plausibility being created. We can't prove this was all, so it must have been on something else. It's a classic unfalsifiable move. It makes the Book of Abraham translation indiscernible from a fraud. If you can't examine the scroll that doesn't exist anymore, it's either a neat theological escape hatch or a strategic dodge. And who knows?
The thing that's remarkable about this particular fraud is that it's such an obvious fraud and yet so passionately defended by otherwise intelligent individuals as being authentic.
Which is why you need a faithful Egyptological point of view instead of just an Egyptological point of view.
Yeah, because an Egyptological point of view on its own is not going to be faithful.
No, it's not. All right, back to this origins. I'll reiterate something I said earlier. Notice again, the church loves this gray area where there might be lots of missing scrolls everywhere, and they're going to need them by the end of this episode if we get to it. Most of the papyri that were in Joseph's possession are now lost, though some fragments have survived. That's to the reader, they're just creating so much room.
It's like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and we got 11 pieces.
Yep. 1841, recent convert William Appleby visited Nauvoo, Illinois, and reported his visit with Joseph Smith. Viewed 4 mummies, males and 3 females brought from ancient Thebes in Egypt. Saw the roll of papyrus and the writing thereon. And I won't read the whole thing. I'll just note if you want to read it, you can just pause the show and you can read that yourself. But the line that's important to me that could be evidence for a missing scroll is that the writings are chiefly in the Egyptian language, with the exception of a little Hebrew, I believe. And so by saying that there's Hebrew out there, and folks can correct me, and you can correct me, RFM, there might actually be some hieratic Hebrew something. There's something on the stuff we have, which I do think has some small bit of connection to Hebrew. And so, Dan, please chime in.
Here's what I'll tell you I know. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is what I think I know. First off, no, there's no Hebrew on the papyrus. That's Egyptian. And Egyptian and Hebrew, completely different languages, even different families of languages. So there's just Egyptian on there. But, and what this may be referring to is the fact that Joseph Smith, for whatever reason, put terms of art in the Book of Abraham, as we have it today, and gave their interpretations, but they're terms that are Hebrew, not all of the weird words he uses, but he uses certain weird words in there, like kokobiam, or the stars. That's Hebrew for stars. What is Hebrew doing in the Book of Abraham? Well, you'd have to be a prophet to tell me that, but that could be what Appleby's referring to. Also, Gnolam, the Gnolam, for they have no beginning, they have no end, they are Nolam, or eternal. That is a Hebrew word too, I believe. So there is Hebrew in the Book of Abraham, but there isn't any Hebrew characters on the papyrus. Okay,
so that makes sense. All right, so now we're into the counter evidence. Now you make a decision on which one's stronger.
Okay.
So let's start with Lucy Mack Smith. I then turned to the glass case and showed her the records which were enclosed under it. He seemed much pleased with the appearance of the mummies, but still more so with the records. This is Lucy Mack describing the Egyptian artifacts in her possession. So she's excited. The important things to her are the pieces under the glass case.
Well, sure. Those are the writings.
Yeah, those are
scripture.
Yeah, those are the ones we have. Josiah Quincy, 1854 recollection.
Oh, by the way, I'm so sorry. Yes, the point you're making is an important one, which is she's talking about not only does she value this over the mummies, but the ones these are like frames. They're like framed pictures. That's how I think of them, okay? They're under glass in order to preserve them so they can handle them and not have them breaking off because they're kind of old and dry and brittle. So you put them under the glass so they can handle them and put them up on the wall. And this is what Lucy Mack Smith's talking about. Those are the fragments, by and large, that we have today, because those are the ones that were found in their frames in 1967. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or at least I think all of them were.
Yes.
Some of them were.
So in 1854, Josiah Quincy is sharing his recollection of an 1844 visit to Nauvoo, and he says, some parchments inscribed with hieroglyphics were then offered us. They were preserved under glass and handled with great respect. That is the handwriting of Abraham, the father of the faithful, said the prophet.
Well, obviously, Josiah Quincy remembered that wrong. What Joseph had really said was, this isn't the handwriting of Abraham, but he wrote the original like 1600 years before this one.
Yeah. And, you know, another thing that Joseph's playing on is that Lehi, a Jew connected to the Hebrews, the Jew comes out of the East, comes to the Americas with knowing Egyptian and reforming the language to create its own language that they use, that the Nephites and Lamanites use. And so it's not out of this world for a Mormon to believe that Abraham would write things down in Egyptian, because Lehi wrote things down basically in Egyptian.
Right. Now, one of the weird things about the Book of Mormon, can I just throw this in here for a second? Because it came to me, I think it was earlier this year, like a bolt out of the blue, which is if we take the Book of Mormon on its own terms, and that, yes, after they got there, by the end of the book, right? By the end of the book, they had reformed the language such that no man knows our language, right? They've completely reformed it. Okay. It's been 1,000 years. I mean, things will happen with the language over that period of time. So the Book of Mormon is true. But it creates another problem, okay? It creates a problem, which is this, is that Mormon lives at the end of this time period, right? And yet, he's going to go back and he's going to abridge the records. And he's even going to read the small plates of Nephi that Nephi himself wrote 1,000 years before. And he's got no problem reading these. He can read them like that. That's the problem, okay? Is that according to what the Book of Mormon tells us, Mormon could not have read the records that were written 1,000 years before. And he couldn't have known that how wonderful they were in order to include them. If he had used some sort of divine means in order to read them, I expect he would have told us, as they tend to do that when they're using special kinds of means like interpreters.
If there was a missing scroll, if the apologists are right, there still needs to be an explanation for why Abraham would write in Egyptian characters.
Why Abraham would? Okay, the reason that Abraham writes in Egyptian characters, why would he write? Okay, because he lived there, damn it. He lived there. There's a connection in the Bible.
Sure.
With Moses, with Abraham, and with Joseph. And those are the three people that, at least Joseph and Abraham, okay, that Joseph associates with the scrolls that come from Egypt, because they're in Egypt, right? Abraham was in Egypt, and so was Joseph.
Okay, let me say it differently. Is it the most reasonable point of view that if there was an actual Abraham outside of Mormonism, forget Mormonism, as a biblical scholar, if Abraham was a real person, would his language, writing language, been Egyptian?
Oh, unlikely.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why he's writing his records in Egyptian or anything like that. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It would not be his language of origin, I think.
Your Honor, I rest my case. No more time to the witness.
But the reason that he's using Egyptian is because you can compress so much meaning, and it's hard to write on these darn plates. And so if you can write in Egyptian where one character gives you an entire paragraph of meaning, then obviously it makes sense to use the more compact language rather than the Hebrew, which, though not as compact, would give you the ability to be much more accurate, and you could ensure the reader that there would be no error, which is all exactly what the Book of Mormon tells the reader.
Okay, but the rational point of view is that Abraham would not have written in Egyptian.
Right. And unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that Egyptian is not a dense language. It's not an ideographic language. It's not only even with Hebrew. Hebrew actually, on average, is more dense than Hebrew. And with that argument, which was found and enunciated recently, to the best of my knowledge, first by Colby Reddish, the Book of Mormon burst into flames. Because we're not talking about what Joseph Smith said about the Book of Mormon. God knows apologists don't care what Joseph Smith said about the Book of Mormon or the Book of Abraham or how he translated it. This is what the Book of Mormon says about itself. And if the Book of Mormon's world that it says is true, that it's being written in Egyptian because there's not enough room on the plates, and that the other language we could have written in was Hebrew, but that would have taken so much more room, that's completely backward and wrong. So what the Book of Mormon says about itself doesn't jibe with the real world, and therefore it cannot be true.
Okay, so again, Josiah Quincy, apologists need to explain this. Joseph Smith tells Josiah Quincy that these pieces underneath the glass, these hieroglyphics, this is the handwriting of Father Abraham. Then we get this. This is City of the Mormons. And this is Henry Caswell. And this is really interesting for a couple of reasons, but I want to read just the underlined parts. So the storekeeper.
Was that the Reverend?
Yeah, I think so.
Caswell?
No. I think that is the case.
Yeah.
City of the Mormons.
Psalter.
3 days at Nauvoo. Yes. Which we did an episode on. If you want to know about the Greek Psalter, you should go check out that episode. I think that was a fun one as well. The storekeeper, and I'm just reading the red parts. The storekeeper led me to the room behind a store. I assume this might be Newell K. Whitney. The way it sounds to me is it's Newell K. Whitney at the Newell K. Whitney store. The storekeeper led me to the room behind his store. It read Office of Joseph Smith, President of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Notice no dash, no, there's a capital D there. So the Joseph Smith originally had this all wrong. By the way, it's not that Caswell had it wrong. The church had it wrong. God had to then insert the dash and put a lowercase d at a later point.
Well, by the time they got to Nauvoo, the revelation had been received in 1838 about the full name of the church.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe they just weren't on top of that.
From this, he drew forth a number of glazed slides like picture frames containing sheets of papyrus with Egyptian inscriptions and hieroglyphics. These had been unrolled from 4 mummies, which the prophet had purchased at the cost of $2,400. Mr. Smith had discovered that these sheets contained the writings of Abraham, written by his own hand while in Egypt, pointing to the figure of a man lying on the table. He said, "This is the picture of Abraham on the point of being sacrificed. That man standing by him with a drawn knife is an idolatrous priest of the Egyptians." Turning to another of the drawers and pointing to the hieroglyphic representation, one of the Mormons said, "Mr. Smith informs us that this picture is an emblem of redemption. Do you see those 4 little figures, the 4 canopic jars, which are in both facsimile 1 and facsimile 3, if I'm not mistaken?"
No, 2. It's in the hypocephalus. They're upside down, but it's only in the hypocephalus that they are interpreted as meaning the 4 quarters of the earth.
Yeah. Do you see these 4 little figures? Well, those are the 4 quarters of the earth. And do you see that big dog looking at the 4 figures? That is the old devil desiring to devour the 4 quarters of the earth. By the way, if it's to be the same as the 4 winds, the devil can't devour winds. That's just ridiculous. So now you've changed the connection that you Mormon apologists do claim is in there. And do you, okay, let me see here. Look at this person keeping back the big dog. That is Jesus Christ keeping the devil from devouring the 4 quarters of the earth. So,
by the way, do you have the facsimile too? You could bring it up so we could see what he's talking about. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, let me see if I've got it.
The big dog, which is the devil, and Jesus has got he's got a leash on that dog.
Yeah, I can put it on this one.
Jesus has taken the devil out for a walk.
So there's that. I can't make it any bigger
than that. It's upside down. It looks like the dog is actually
Right
Hathor
here.
the cow. It is. It's Hathor the cow. That's a big dog. And then there's the person behind it, and I'm not sure what god that is. But
right here's the devil.
I don't know who it is, but it's upside down. So I'm gonna plead that.
So there's the devil behind
Jesus. Jesus and holding. You see, Jesus has got that bull on a leash, and so it becomes Jesus holding back the dog who is Satan from eating the 4 quarters of the earth. Nothing could be plainer.
All right, so there's that. So that's Henry Caswell. Now here's the one that struck me as the most important piece. This is Oliver Cowdery, I believe. This is the Latter-day Saints messenger and advocate. This is contemporary. This is Kirtland, Ohio, December 1835. So this isn't Hugh Nibbli to Preston Nibbli to Joseph F. Smith to Joseph Smith. This is just Oliver Cowdery, 1835, in the room. And Oliver Cowdery says, when examined, proved to be 2 rolls of papyrus previously mentioned. I may add that 2 or 3 other small pieces of papyrus with astronomical calculations, epitaphs, etc., were found with others of the mummies.
So there's the hypocephalus. There's the fragment from the other Book of the Dead that isn't the scroll. There's a fragment from a separate Book of the Dead.
Amenhotep?
Right. Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
And then there's another fragment. And basically, everything's accounted for.
Yep.
There aren't vast swaths of missing stuff that Joseph Smith and the Saints bought. We've got the 2 scrolls accounted for. Almost all of both scrolls are accounted for. Bill will show you that. And we've got the different fragments accounted for. There's not some great mystery. Some apologists like John Gee who want to have lots of lost scrolls, because the more lost scrolls you have, the more chance you have to have a Book of Abraham on one of them somewhere. But no, we really have pretty much everything that they had. And if we don't have it, it's a small part, and we have a very good idea as to what it is that's missing based upon what it is that we have.
Yep. And I'll show that here. So yes, 2 rolls and then 2 to 3 other little pieces. Then you get W.W. Phelps, who's in July 1835. He's writing to Sally Phelps. This is when Joseph Smith is buying the mummies. This is also contemporary. On July 19th, 20th, 1835, W.W. Phelps wrote his wife about the recent news in Kirtland, Ohio. On the last of June, 4 Egyptian mummies were brought here. With them were 2 papyrus rolls. By the way, you'll notice apologists do not ever quote these 2 sources. They don't use these 2 sources at all. RFM, I'm going to stop for just a second and ask you. I want to ask you what's going on in your neck of the woods.
I don't know. I think someone's drilling.
Okay,
you hear the background noise?
I don't hear anything.
You don't hear that?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
The mics that we use are really good quality. They don't tend to pick up a lot of stuff far away. So
I think someone's coming in through the ceiling.
Yeah, I don't hear it. So
all right.
What I was trying to tell folks is that this is another contemporary source. And by the way, notice that John Gee, Stephen Smoot, Kerry Molstein, Michael Rhodes, those guys don't ever want to quote these 2 sources. W.W. Phelps says, on the last of June, the 4 Egyptian mummies were brought here. With them were 2 papyrus rolls.
Everybody says 2.
Besides some other ancient Egyptian writings. As no one could translate these writings, they were presented to President Smith. He soon knew that what they were and said the rolls of papyrus contained a sacred. By the way, he's not saying the other small pieces. He's defining those 2 rolls that he mentioned. He soon knew what they were and said the rolls of papyrus contained a sacred record kept by Joseph in Pharaoh's court in Egypt and the teachings of Father Abraham. W.W. Phelps to Sally Phelps, July 1835. Why don't the apologists, these are way stronger than any of the other sources we read.
These are contemporary.
Why don't we say these ones? Because
we need to have 3 scrolls and a whole lot of a shit ton of fragments floating out that got burned up in the fire that had the Book of Abraham all over them.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, I know you're going to get to this too.
Yep.
But not only did the fragments we not have the Book of Abraham on it, they also had the Book of Joseph on it.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. Actually, there's a third thing that's missing as well. So we'll get to that here. What we know about these rolls. So the Book of Abraham papyrus, what we have is the top middle and the top right image. There's a little bit of duplication there at the seam. I didn't move the picture over far enough. But you get the Book of Abraham papyrus that we have in our possession. And then in the top left is facsimile 3, which we know was attached in some way to this roll. And then Robert Rittner says there may have been possibly 2 to 3 columns of more writing. And that would be it. Robert Rittner says that's it. Once you get to that, it's over. And then the bottom one is the Book of Joseph papyrus. This is the other roll. These are the 2 rolls that W.W. Phelps and Oliver Cowdery are speaking of. So the missing portion theory, modern LDS estimates, scholars like John Gee, and by the way, he's changed on this. He's not consistent. John Gee's proposed that Joseph originally had 5 distinct papyrus documents, including at least 2 main rolls. Of those, only pieces of 2 survived into the 20th century. So John Gee here, and he's advocated for all of these. So he's advocated for the long missing scroll, which he uses the Hugh Nibbli quote.
Mm-hmm.
If you shoot that one down, now he works with a missing portion of the current scroll.
Mm-hmm.
And he does that by saying this scroll should be much longer as well. And he estimated that this roll should have been 40 feet.
Right.
Then he decides that his math is bad, because when Egyptologists do math, it doesn't always come out good.
I feel for him.
Yeah. So John Gee decides that, no, it wouldn't have been 40 feet. I was wrong. I probably shouldn't be doing math, but my new math formula says it's 10 feet.
Which is still a lot longer than it really is.
It's way longer than what it really is.
The point is to have as much extra material in there that we don't have, so that the Book of Abraham could have been on it.
So he gives his
math. This is what an observant Jew, I almost said observant Jew. This is what an observant Egyptian who cares about having a book of breathings or a book of the dead buried with them so they can make it to the promised land, right? This is what they want to show up in heaven with Osiris and Anubis and everybody, is they want to show up with a scroll that is a story about a Jewish guy named Abraham, because they think that's really going to do the trick. This is really going to get me into heaven.
Oh, so he ends up deciding it's 10 feet, 10 to 12 feet, I think, is what he comes up with. But, again, his math is a little fuzzy. How many of the papyrus fragments are missing today? Now, again, this is the church's new origins of the Book of Abraham. They say most of the papyri that were in Joseph's possession are now lost, though some fragments have survived. We've read that. This is the 3rd time we've read that tonight. In another section, they say scholars generally agree. No, LDS believing scholars generally agree that the papyri now in existence represents only a fraction of the 2 original scrolls.
That's true, Bill. Because 99% is a fraction. It's not a fraction, it's actually a percentage. But 99 100ths, that's a fraction. I remember from junior high school. I had to take the class twice, so I should remember. 99 100ths is a fraction, Bill. Prove me wrong. I know they say only a fraction, but now you're splitting hairs.
This reminds me of when Elder Holland said double-digit state creation, más o menos, every week of our lives. And people said, Bill, if you just put a decimal in there, they are actually creating 1.6 stakes per week. And that's double digits. That's kind of the same kind of math. All right.
But to the extent that they are saying scholars generally agree that the papyri now in existence represent only a fraction, to the degree that they're trying to give the impression that it's a small fraction, they're lying.
They're lying.
Yeah.
And we know that because the 2 best sources are W.W. Phelps and Oliver Cowdery, and they limit it to 2 rolls and then 2 to 3 small pieces.
But remember, they're not lying willy-nilly. They're lying for a purpose. Though this be madness, yet there is method in it. And the point of this is to say that scholars agree that the Book of Abraham could have been written on some of that lot of papyri that we don't have. Prove that wrong, Bill. You can't. You know why? Because it's designed that way. It's designed so it can't be falsifiable. That's the whole point.
The evidence of absence is not the absence of evidence.
Except it usually is.
Except
for most reasonable people.
Yes.
The absence of ever having seen a unicorn in your life will tend to make most reasonable people conclude that they don't exist.
Yeah. In an effort to bolster the missing scroll theory with hard numbers, John Gee conducted mathematical reconstructions. He originally estimated 40 feet, comes down to 10 feet. Ancient Egyptian scrolls often contained more than one text, particularly if the scroll was long, so the theory goes. The Horror Scroll may have started with the funerary text, the part that we have, and then continued with a completely different document, such as the Book of Abraham, which you pointed out, RFM, is absolutely absurd. And they'll find some instance where two things are put together in one case somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, and then they use that as if that is evidence of their theory being true.
Well, yeah, that becomes the norm. That's the exception that's going to prove Mormonism true, baby. Mormonism has been gasping, getting by on exceptions for decades now.
The idea is that a short breathing permit wouldn't require an entire 40-foot scroll or a 10-foot one. So something else must have been filling the remaining space.
Sure.
That's something else, apologists suggest, was Abraham's narrative, and maybe even the Book of Joseph too, since the papyri we have isn't the Book of Joseph, because we can read that Egyptian as well.
I mean, honestly, can you imagine being a Jehovah's Witness and wanting to be buried in the Mormon temple garment? Because you think that's going to help you on the day of judgment? That is what this is like, okay? I'm trying to give you an example, a modern day example, so you can appreciate how crazy an Egyptian would be to have the Book of Abraham, you know, like part 2 of my Book of Breathings.
He has to be like Martin Harris, where he's joining every church and he just wants to cover his bases. He wants to.
Well, the problem is you want to cover your bases, but you've also got to think about what might happen. You know, when Horus sees you with this, you know, the Book of Abraham, and says, it's not like he's going to be beneficent about it. It's not like, oh, that's cool. At least you got the Book of Breathings, bro. You know,
dude,
come on in. I think it's going to be more like, you know, bad things are going to happen to you now because you brought this into our sacred space.
Remember what Mormonism does if you join another church.
That's right. The one thing they don't do is shun you.
All right. So, according to defenders of the missing scroll theory, the surviving papyrus with facsimile 1, Dan Vogel,
Look at what he's saying there. You see what he's saying there?
Was there a Book of Joseph at the end of the Tasharit Min papyrus as well? We'll get to that, Dan. It's worse than that, by the way.
You're going to love this, Dan.
According to defenders of the missing scroll theory, the surviving papyrus with facsimile 1, the breathing permit of Hor, is probably not the source of the Book of Abraham. It's more likely an unrelated document that happened to be physically close to the vignette. They argue that it's reckless to assume Joseph's translation came from this funerary text.
It's reckless.
Especially since it makes up only a small portion of what was originally there. Remember, now it's 10 to 12 feet. And if 95% of the scroll is gone, if we go off the 40 feet, then the real text of Abraham could have easily been part of the missing section, now reduced to ash or dust in Chicago.
Where?
Chicago.
That toddling town. Hey, if you go back here for a second.
Yes.
I can't remember what it was. Oh, there's a reckless thing, right? Oh my gosh, that would be reckless. It would be reckless for you to think this. Why'd you pull me over, officer? Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to write you a citation for reckless translating.
All right. By the way,
how
you're
many slides are there? I'm going to keep this going to midnight. That's my goal.
It's going to go to midnight. I don't know how many slides, but there's a lot of them. All right. So the missing scroll or missing parts of an existing scroll apologetic summary, we'll skip that. It's everything we've just been saying the last 10 minutes. Let me read the bottom paragraph, though. Hugh Nibbli was the first major figure to popularize this idea. He insisted that nothing in the extant fragments ruled out the possibility of an authentic Book of Abraham on a missing portion. Since then, the theory has been expanded by Farms, the Interpreter Foundation, John Gee, Michael Rhodes, Kerry Molstein, Stephen Smoot. As long as the missing scroll remains unaccounted for apologists argue critics haven't disproven anything, and believers can hold their ground.
Well, if Stephen Smoot agrees, then I'm behind it.
So here's the problems with this. So first off, Joseph translates all 3 facsimiles horrifically wrong. He names every figure. He tells you what these things meant. By the way, I just want to note, we'll get to this in the episode on Anubis's snout, but I'll just really quickly lay out what I think is a big deal. Every one of those characters is drawn correctly. Joseph's reproduction of facsimile 3 accurately depicts every character on that facsimile except for Anubis, and the lettering below and above Anubis is intact. But strangely, we have to believe that there's a lacuna right on the upper midsection and head of Anubis, so much so that Joseph felt permission to draw in a short man with an antenna coming out of his head instead of 2 ears with a snout. All right, so
I'll move on. The pinhead. Now, let me see if I understand this correctly. Okay, so this is the presentation scene. This is happening in heaven. And the main guy, okay, first off, over here on the left, sitting down, okay, I think that's Osiris. That's the head god, okay? And I think Horus is the son. His wife is behind him. I think that's Isis. So these are the two main deities here, Isis and Osiris. There's the lotus. And then I think this is Mot, this lady here, the goddess of truth. But on the far right, that's Anubis, who's the god of the dead, who's presenting. He's got his hands on the hips. They're going to do a conga line if you're not careful. He's presenting that guy, the guy who's second from the right. Okay? The one who the waiter, Anubis, has his hands on the hips. That is Hor. That's the guy who owns the papyrus. And this is a picture of the guy who owns the papyrus being presented by the god of the dead after being resurrected. And actually, I think that's what's happening in the first facsimile in this one. But presenting him, he has to pass the test of truth and be weighed in the balance with a feather, blah, blah, blah. But now he's being presented in the heavenly presence. So this is heaven. He made it.
And I'll just note to what you're saying, these characters, except for Horus, every person who dies who has a Book of the Dead will have, generally speaking, they do differ a little bit from document to document, and they will switch out a god here, a god there. But generally, the same characters, the same figures will show up in all of these books of the dead, with the exception of the one character who is being represented. That person is a representation of the person who actually died, who the breathing permit is being made for.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yep, mine too. All right, so let me put us back on the side. Figure out how I do that. Okay, so here,
okay,
and there, and there.
Yes. Okay. Richard says Joseph was just translating this as a man.
Yeah, this is not a prophet acting as such.
I think the problem is Joseph did everything as a man.
Yeah, facsimile 3, everything is wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. Facsimile 1, outside of a barely connection with the crocodile god and a barely connection with the canopic jars, everything here is wrong, 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 wrong.
Which means that the connections have to be meaningless. I'm going to say it again for all those apologists out there who are watching. Your dumbass connections on the Book of Abraham, facsimiles, and anywhere else are meaningless. They have to be coincidences. If they had any meaning, there wouldn't only be a few of them. It would follow. It would connect. It would be translated correctly. But it's not. And so your handful of anemic parallels don't amount to any evidence at all in consideration of this issue.
And they don't care at all that Min's down there with an erection, and that's Heavenly Father on his throne. They don't care at all that the hypocephalus was missing about a third of the material, and Joseph took characters off of other documents in this papyri collection that didn't belong on this, and he puts them inside the hypocephalus to complete it. And now you have incoherent sentences because you've mixed and matched various Egyptian words from various sentences to basically create Egyptian gibberish.
Yeah. Are you saying you've never had an erection while sitting on your throne, Bill?
No comment, Your Honor. All right. So, fragment of breathing of the Book of Breathing for Horus. Now, again, we're going to use those words fragment as well. Fragment of Book of the Dead for Seminus. So the above one is the Book of Breathing for Horus. Horus is the guy who died, who had the Book of Breathing paid for and made for him and stuck with him in his dead body when he was mummified. And then the Book of the Dead for Seminus. Seminus is the person who died. Again, these are just standard Egyptian mummies. There's nothing special.
I think they're all dead, Bill.
Lobolo, I think it's Lobolo, I think is the guy that originally found these. And
Anthony Lobolo.
Anthony Lobolo finds 4 mummies, and they have their normal Egyptian documents with them. And he sells them to Joseph Smith, and Joseph Smith goes, I know what I can do. Nobody can read Egyptian. So I'm about to create a really fun story with these things. But they're just standard funeral text.
I think he really believed he had the inside scoop.
Yeah.
I think he was buying the con at that point.
Joseph Smith claims this bottom one is the Book of Joseph. The top one is the Book of Abraham. And as you pointed out, and as Dan is pointing out, and we'll show it again at the end, where's the Book of Joseph? You have to have 2 missing scrolls, RFM. It's not just the missing scroll of Abraham, it's the missing scroll of Joseph as well, because even though Joseph didn't translate it, he imposed that it was here. And
did you hear that?
Yeah, that's my phone's connected for the call-in studio, and I forgot to mute that on the board. So it's muted now.
I was imagining things again.
Nope. So Joseph Smith says that the Book of Joseph is in these papyri as well, and everything we have is not the Book of Joseph. Egyptologists can translate the Book of the Dead for Seminis, and it's not the Book of Joseph. Hence, we have to have 2 missing scrolls or 2 missing portions of a scroll. So it gets even more difficult to make this work. Anybody who says there's a missing scroll, say, wait a minute, is there a missing scroll for Abraham and Joseph? And then I'll give you a third one here when we get to it. All right, so we're back to Oliver Cowdery. There's only 2 rolls and then 2 to 3 other small pieces. So what are the other small pieces? We know what these are. We know it's one of them is the hypocephalus, which you pointed out. When we go to what else it is, so it's the hypocephalus. It's the Book of the Dead for Nefer-Ur-Nibu. I don't know how to say that, but it would be a Book of the Dead as well. So we have 3 essentially books of the dead. One's a breathing permit, but a breathing permit, 2 books of the dead, a hypocephalus that goes underneath the head, and then a second Book of the Dead, which is the Book of the Dead of Amenhotep. And we know what we have. This is what Oliver Cowdery is pointing at. Oliver Cowdery says that we've got 2 rolls, the Book of Abraham roll, the Book of Joseph roll.
Yes.
The Book of the Dead for Amenhotep is probably much smaller, and hence it would have appeared to them to be sort of a small fragment compared to the 2 rolls. It may have been missing stuff. It may have been disintegrated, whatever it is. It's not as big because it's constantly referred to as smaller pieces. You got the hypocephalus, and you've got this Book of the Dead for Nefer-Ur-Nibu. We'll get to this Book of the Dead for Amenhotep in a minute, because I think this is also another missing role they're going to have to propose. Joseph Smith translations, we're getting sort of towards the end, so I don't think we'll go too much longer, but this is the Joseph Smith Papers Project. This is what Brian Hagglid worked on. What's the other gentleman's name?
Robin Jensen.
Robin Jensen.
It's right there.
Church Historian's Office. Yep. And both Robin Jensen and Brian Hagglid agree that the Kirtland Egyptian papers are tied directly to Joseph Smith's translation of the Book of Abraham, and was done in October. And there isn't any way that Guy and Molstein can get away from that. And so they don't like Brian Hagglid or Robin Jensen for holding those points of view, even though both of those originated those points of view from within the church as a faithful point of view.
I understand from sources whose names I cannot mention.
Yeah.
That John Gee was really, actually, it's obvious, was really upset that he was not permitted to be one of the editors on this volume.
I think the church wanted this to truly be scholarly. And I think they know the game that's being played.
Ouch. That hurt.
I think they know the game that's being played. And so when you do the Joseph Smith papers, you need that to be credible. And when you explain in the gospel topic essays, you get lots of workarounds.
Yeah.
All right. Another thing that works against the missing scroll theory is the Kirtland Egyptian papers. Joseph Smith puts the very characters from the Book of Abraham papyrus. Him and his scribes are working on translation. They're creating a sort of dictionary for what they're translating. And so as Joseph gives the translation for the Book of Abraham, he then takes a character, puts it in the margins, and then writes the paragraph of what that means in the Book of Abraham. It's pretty clear. Every human being without a predisposed position that needs to come out faithful would see this as one equals the other.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's only when it keeps running into your basic thesis, your conclusion that Joseph Smith is a prophet and really could translate, that you have to do these incredibly stupid and idiotic theories and workarounds. So instead of it being what it obviously is, which is Joseph Smith attempting to translate these different Egyptian characters, which are written in the margin, they're taken off the papyri in the same order and written down on the paper. And then you've got text from the Book of Abraham next to each one. Then what the that can't be true, because if that's true, then Joseph Smith is not a prophet, at least not as we have believed him to be. Therefore, the writing went down before the names went on. The writing went down, and then later on, some scribes, when Joseph Smith was not there, he's probably out, I don't know, doing something or someone. And then they put these Egyptian characters in the margins for no reason. I mean, it's just sort of ornamental. Hugh Nibbli actually, I think, used that word ornamental just to pretty it up some. It only looks like they're translating from it, but actually the translation went down, and then much later on, the scribes by themselves put on the characters.
I'm just making this connection now. I have in my possession Hugh Nibbli's copy of the Journal of Discourses. I've got all the volumes. They're his. He puts ornamental Egyptian-looking hieroglyphic things in the margins, and then I'll take some pictures and I'll send it to you tonight after the show's over.
This?
Hugh Nibbli. I have Hugh Nibbli's Journal of Discourses, and he does this very thing in them. I sort of wonder if he's like, well, he was ornamental. I'm going to make some ornamental things too. So
he's creating evidence.
He might be.
Theory.
Yeah. I'm going to send you pictures of it when I get done here tonight. All right. So there's that.
That's funny.
Perhaps the most damning evidence against the missing scroll comes from Joseph Smith's own translation papers. In the Kirtland Egyptian papers, Joseph Smith's scribes created manuscripts where they copied the Egyptian characters from the papyrus fragments in the left-hand column, everything you just said. I'm going to read the bottom one. The recent Joseph Smith Papers volume 2018 made this clear. This is Brian Hagglid and Robin Jensen. I don't know where Brian's at today. Robin is still in the church, faithful, historian's office. Here's what the two of them said. Joseph Smith and or his clerks associated the characters from the surviving breathing permit of Hor papyri with the English Book of Abraham text. This is what it adds here. This isn't them. This undercuts the apologetic claim that the critics simply assumed the wrong papyrus. The historical documents show that Joseph himself made that connection. If Joseph thought the breathing permit characters corresponded to Abraham's story, the rationale for a separate lost Abraham scroll grows weak. And here's what their argument would then need to be. So you need to hold the catalyst theory. And so Joseph is looking at the Book of Abraham papyri. He thinks he's translating the Book of Abraham papyri, but what really is happening is that's a standard Egyptian funeral text. God's giving him the Book of Abraham through the Spirit, through the Holy Ghost, through the I was going to say, what's the Mormon phrase? A gift and power of God.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and Joseph is allowed by God to think he's translating the papyri. So then him and his scribes are then trying to go back with hindsight and then go, well, then this symbol must mean this, and this symbol must mean this, and this symbol must mean this. But if you don't know Egyptian, and nobody then does, it's a strange thing if the catalyst theory is true for you still to try to figure out what symbols mean which paragraphs.
Yeah. Can I just tell you what happened? Okay. I wasn't there, but I remote viewed it. So I was watching what Joseph Smith was doing and reading his mind at the same time. He got these scrolls. He got really excited about them. He can't read Egyptian, but you know what he can do? He can look at pictures. And all he did was look at the pictures on the scroll and created the story. I mean, he's familiar, like pretty much everybody else was, with the attempted sacrifice of Abraham when he was a kid. And even though it's a furnace, he's going to see this as something like that. And so what he's doing, he's not interpreting Egyptian. characters, he's translating the pictures. And he's creating this narrative based on what's facsimile 1, the facsimile 3, and the hypocephalus, which didn't belong there, but he brought it in anyway. Because that's the astronomy that Abraham learns in chapter 3 from God. And of course, he's going to have Abraham learning astronomy because he knows that Abraham taught astronomy, because it's not in the Bible, but it's in Joseph Smith's copy of Josephus. So I think this is what he did. And on the Joseph scroll, the Book of the Dead, we see Joseph Smith never got around to translating it. But we know, I think Oliver Cowdery, among others, described the figures on them. And they're going from the drawings as well. And every single drawing, I believe, that they interpret is interpreted in some sort of biblical way. So they have no knowledge of Egyptology or Egyptian legends per se. Maybe they know a few. But they know their Bible backward and forward. And so therefore, one tower becomes the Tower of Enoch. And that's in apocryphal literature. That's not in the Bible, but it's about Enoch. And then the snake with the legs. Hey, we know what that is. That's the serpent in the Garden of Eden before he got cursed. And he's talking to Eve. Okay? It's obvious. All these things are atrociously wrong, have nothing to do with what these are about, and simply show that what the people are doing is they're interpreting these Egyptian drawings in terms of what they already know and believe, which is the Bible. And I don't think there's any reason to think that Joseph Smith did any different in coming up with the Book of Abraham.
And you can follow all of this, the idea of apologetics behind this, you can follow in chronology and in rationale, and they go together. So first you start off with, these are the writings of Abraham upon the papyrus discovered in the catacombs of Egypt, written by his own hand. That turns out not to be true. So now you come up with a missing scroll theory. Well, the missing scroll, there isn't a missing scroll. The people who decide like that doesn't hold up now come up with a missing portion of the existing scroll theory. Well, that doesn't work because the actual science from Chris Smith and again, I forget the other gentleman, but I think there's a slide here with him. They show that it wasn't that long. Robert Rittner says it wasn't that long. Okay, well, if it's not a missing portion or a missing scroll, now we have a catalyst theory. And the catalyst theory has problems too. So now the way you solve the catalyst theory is you add another theory called the Jewish redactor theory, the J-Red theory. And the J-Red theory is the missing scroll doesn't work, the missing portion of a scroll doesn't work, the catalyst theory doesn't work. We agree with all of that. So it actually is the Book of Abraham scroll. Egyptologists are right. That is a standard funerary text, but some Jew somewhere along the way took that document and repurposed it and then buried it like a standard Egyptian burial with a mummified Egyptian mummy. And I can't hear you, RFM.
Said, yes, you're right. And what was also helpful for that theory is that the papyrus is only like a couple hundred years before Jesus. So Abraham would have lived, if he lived, around 1800 years BCE. This scroll is 200 to 300 years BCE at the most. So it's way out of place. I mean, 15 to 1600 years, that's a long time. So it wasn't written by Abraham. And therefore, since it's so much earlier than what happened, this J-Red, the Jewish redactor, Kevin Barney, I remember the name. I was talking about it with you the other day, and I couldn't remember his name. He's an apologist. He's an attorney. I think he works in Chicago. True story. Chicago. And I talked with him once about this J-Red idea. And I said to him on the phone, I said, here's the thing. Okay, you've gone almost all the way there, Kevin. Okay, you said that this scroll has nothing to do with Abraham. And that sometime around 300, 200 years BCE, some Jewish person got a hold of it and they redacted it. That's the J-Red, the Jewish redactor, right? And so he interpreted what had nothing to do with Abraham in terms of Abraham. Okay? And so Joseph Smith somehow, I don't know, mind melded with that ancient Jewish redactor and wrote down that text of the Book of Abraham. Okay? And I talked to him, I said, okay, you're almost there. Kevin, you're almost there. But if you're already to the point where you're positing a Jewish redactor who lived at 300 BCE, why don't you just go the whole way and say Joseph was the redactor and he's the one who did everything you're saying the Jewish redactor did? You know what Kevin Barney said? He said that's what the J stands for. It's not just the Jewish redactor. It's also the Joseph redactor.
What's the quote from Sherlock Holmes? When you've looked at everything, no matter how implausible.
See, you're going to start off, and I'm going to get okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Take your time.
No, I have no idea now because now you started it off. If I knew what the quote was, what is it?
When you've eliminated.
Thank you. It's the process of elimination.
Yeah.
When you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth or the answer. Thank you. That's it.
Yes. Here's what apologists do. Only a faithful view is allowed. So the fact that the critical view is actually the most likely, that's not allowed. So no matter what else is left, no matter how improbable, that must be the truth. That's how they work. They're like Sherlock Holmes, except they're ignoring the main pieces of evidence because they've already drawn their conclusion on who the murderer is.
Well, yes, and that's the other famous Sherlock Holmes quote. Actually, they're much more like Watson than Holmes in this. The other famous quote from Sherlock Holmes is that it is a capital mistake. This is when, and he's talking to that bonehead, though earnest, bonehead Watson. It is a capital mistake to begin to theorize before one has all the facts. Inevitably, no, actually, he says insensibly, one begins to twist the facts to fit the theory instead of the theory to fit the facts.
That sounds like fair Mormon.
Yes.
Okay,
you're twisting the night away.
I don't think I need to read this. You can pause it and read that. Spencer Wright, we've had him on the show before. Spencer Wright he articulates this very well. The only reason Mormon apologists suppose a missing scroll is to cast doubt that we have the text Joseph Smith claimed to be translating. But that's nonsense. There's almost certainly not a missing scroll, but even if there was another missing scroll, it wouldn't even matter since we know exactly which characters Joseph Smith claimed to be translating. These are the characters from one of the Book of Abraham manuscripts that lined up perfectly with the first few lines of Joseph Smith papers number 11.
Oh, and by the way, guess what? They're right next to facsimile 1 on the papyrus too.
Yeah, right.
Just where you think they would be.
By the way, facsimile 1's on one side, facsimile 3 is on the other side. They are both parts of the Book of Abraham, and yet we're not supposed to believe that what's between them is being used.
Yeah, apparently not.
It makes no sense. The manuscript characters without a corresponding papyrus character are where the lacuna of the Joseph Smith number 11 are. And again, they numbered each one of these fragments, but I believe number 11 is facsimile 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I think so.
Okay.
In facsimile 1, JSP, Joseph Smith Papyrus 1, is also the piece that was right next to it, became separated from it, I think.
So the apologists then respond to this. This is again the way this all works. The moment you show something, they have another argument. Some LDS defenders counter that this translation manuscript might have been produced after the Book of Abraham was already translated, meaning the Kirtland Egyptian papers, perhaps as an experiment or reverse engineering exercise in creating the Egyptian alphabet. They claim Joseph could have revealed the Book of Abraham by inspiration from a missing scroll or otherwise, and only later tried to match characters to the revealed text. However, the simultaneous dictation evidence, multiple scribes writing the same text at the same time, suggest at least the early chapters of Abraham were being created in July 1835. That would be Abraham 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then everything else is October or thereabouts, in conjunction with those characters, implying these working papers, not after the fact curiosities.
Okay, I think that the first 2 chapters that we have in the Book of Abraham were probably translated around November and December of 1835. And then 3, 4, and 5 were done in a rush at the beginning of 42 prior to publication, I think.
Okay, thank you. The point being is that the Kirtland Egyptian papers timing is right in line with the translation, so it's not an afterthought. Even LDS scholar Brian Hagglid, once an apologist himself, has publicly reversed his stance, agreeing that the Egyptian papers were used to produce the Book of Abraham, that he now rejects a missing Abraham manuscript. This is quite the turnaround. One of the very editors of the Joseph Smith Papers Project came to the side of Vogel and Metcalf's interpretation after seeing all the evidence. So what is missing? Again, this is John Gee doing math. I don't think that math adds up. I know for sure this math doesn't add up. This is John Gee figuring the length of the scroll, showing you his work on his calculator.
By the way, this is not showing on the screen, Bill.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me grab that off.
I know you worked hard on these, and I hate
Oh,
for it to
yeah.
go
Let me go
together.
back here. What is missing? Here's John Gee and his math. I don't think that math adds up, but that's a complicated formula, so I wouldn't know. But
It looks like he's been hitting the gin.
Yeah, he's doing great. And here's John Gee showing you his work on his calculator. Pi equals 3.0. 40 plus 60 equals 120. This is the BYU Department of Math, by the way. X equals A plus B over 0. All right, so it is here. Chris Smith and Andrew Cook. That's the gentleman.
That's what I meant.
He is a PhD physicist. Okay, so we have an Egyptologist and a PhD physicist figuring out the length of these rolls. Who do you trust? Guess who the believers trust? They trust the Egyptologist and his math. Whereas I'm going to go with the physicist every day of the week and twice on Sunday.
And I think what this has to do with is a scroll is rolled up. It may get bunged or injured at one place. And the injury to the end of the scroll is going to be through the different levels. Okay. So therefore, you can start figuring out, I have no idea, but there's from that, somebody who knows what they're doing can figure out the equation, if it's not already done, in order to use it to estimate the length of the entire scroll.
Yes. And we already showed evidence against a missing scroll. That's W.W. Phelps and Oliver Cowdery. They say there's only 2 rolls and some other small pieces. And Cowdery specifically says 2 to 3 small pieces. Now we're talking about a missing portion of the existing scroll. And Chris Smith and Andrew Cook figure out that the lack of sufficient space for the Book of Abraham source text on the Hor scroll raises the question of whether such a text might have been on another scroll or fragment in the original collection. This hypothesis appears unlikely since the canonized Book of Abraham specifically places the introductory vignette of Hor, document of breathing, at its commencement. So the Book of Abraham tells us where facsimile 1 is and where facsimile 3 is. And we know based on all these books of the dead, how they're ordered, and the apologetic argument doesn't work.
And please understand that this whole sideline, this sideshow of how long the scrolls are was invented by John Gee in order to try and have the scroll be so much longer where the Book of Abraham could be hiding. And he said 40 feet at first. Then he finally said 10 feet. Well, there's still plenty of room for the Book of Abraham. And now these other individuals go, no, there isn't 10 feet. It wasn't. No, you did this all wrong. It was much shorter. There's no room for the Book of Abraham. Time to head to the showers, Gee.
Never let an Egyptologist do math. It's just never going to go well. So about a third of the way down here, their conclusion as shown is that there is no more than 56 centimeters of papyrus that can be missing from the scroll's interior. That's about 22 inches of missing papyrus, give or take. Only essentially a couple of feet or less, not 10. In fact, they note that this 56 centimeters is only 10% of what would be required to fit the entire English text of the Book of Abraham in hieratic script. The implication? The existing scroll of Hor simply wasn't long enough to contain the Book of Abraham narrative beyond what we already have. Klaus Baer, an Egyptologist in the 1960s, had similarly estimated that the Hor's original length to be about 5 feet in total, quite close to what Cook and Smith confirmed. In short, the science of the papyrus reconstruction strongly suggests we aren't missing some massive chunk. At most, a couple of pages worth could be gone from the Hor scroll, and it should be noted that the estimated gap is best explained as simply missing facsimile 3. Though Robert Rittner has proposed that there might be 2 to 3 more columns of Egyptian writing missing beyond that. In other words, what is missing? Only what we expect to be missing.
Yeah, very, very little. And what little is missing, we know what it should be.
I also want to note one more thing. Notice how intact it is going over to Anubis. It's quite intact there where that connection would be. Now, we don't know what might be in between.
Mhm.
We don't know for sure this is where they connected. I will only note that it is a little strange that we need Anubis to be not there when every other character and the writing above and below Anubis is there. And Anubis does seem to have the eye that to some degree that Anubis would have had, by the way. And he has at least a partial of his back ear, which now stands as an antenna on this black slave that, by the way, that's racist, to take Anubis and make him into a black slave simply because of the color of his skin, which was done because it's often Anubis was represented with a dark red ink.
But this would be the most natural thing in the world for Joseph Smith to interpret it this way. He is in, what do you call it? Antebellum America.
Yeah. And remember, too, that part of the justification for the racist priesthood ban, I think, was Abraham 1:12, where Pharaoh isn't allowed to have the priesthood.
Is 112 through 14, isn't that where it refers to the facsimile at the beginning? And is it, I thought it was in chapter 2 where it talks
Maybe
about
it's
the ban.
2:12. Okay. But somewhere early in the book of Abraham, Joseph creates scripture that justifies certain groups of people not having the priesthood, and it plays into the racist priesthood ban. So there's that. Okay, I'll just note here, Dan Vogel.
Okay, Dan, I hope you're still with us over there on Eastern Time.
Dan says the same thing. I'll just note there on the right-hand side, about 56 centimeters or about 22 inches long. This means that there was an intact roll of about 4 inches wide and about 5 feet long that Guy and Molstein's eyewitnesses saw and identified as the Book of Abraham. This approximately 5-foot roll. By the way, that's not my writing. That's Dan Vogel's writing of the 5 in place of the 2. I think it's an error on his part, and he's correcting himself. The approximately 5-foot roll was no doubt among the Egyptian relics sold on the 26th of May, 1856 to Abel Combs, who immediately sold a portion of the collection to the St. Louis Museum, where they placed it on display. And then it goes on how that came to be. So there's that. All right. Facsimile placement and wrong papyrus theory. I'm just going to really quickly note this. The illustrations and text don't always align. In ancient papyri, this is the argument that the apologists make. An additional argument comes from Carrie Molstein and Megan Hansen, who proposed that scholars made a flawed assumption in 1967. They argue it was a mistake to assume that the Egyptian text immediately adjacent to facsimile 1 must be the source of the Book of Abraham, even though it is time and time and time again.
Over and over, a million times.
They give several reasons for why. The illustrations and text don't always align. 99.9% of the time they do, but they don't always align. In ancient papyri, vignettes were not always placed directly next to the text they illustrated. Sometimes they were separated or even paired with unrelated content. So
it's like back when I was a kid and I had a library book, and it might have been The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle. And they have some drawings, they're kind of bad drawings, but they're drawings in the book, and it'd be on a page, and here's this dinosaur, attacking by moonlight. And it might be actually facing the part of the book that's describing it, but as often as not, it would be 1 or 2 or even 3 pages removed from it.
Yeah. They also make the argument that facsimile 1 is atypical. By the way, you can go online and look up Books of the Dead. They all have little differences to them. And I know the Egyptologists would say, yeah, but there's also groups of them that are highly identical. That's also true. But there are differences. But none of the differences make room for Abraham in biblical Christianity. So no other known copy of a breathing permit includes a vignette like facsimile 1. The unusual scene of a man on an altar could indicate the image came from a completely different text, perhaps Abraham's story of nearly being sacrificed. Since it is unique, we should be permitted to assign a highly unlikely meaning to it. That's our words, not theirs. All right, Book of Abraham mentioned.
Right. We're not having to debunk all of these tonight, are we, Bill?
No, in fact,
we've certainly done it before.
Yeah, yeah,
and it
no,
would
no,
take a
no.
long time to do them all. That's why I'm
No, no, no.
asking.
Yeah,
before
I'm just reading them briefly.
Okay.
And then we go right to the conclusion next. So this is almost done. The Book of Abraham mentions the image in the text of Abraham 1:12, 1:14. There are references to the image being at the beginning of the record. Apologists interpret this to mean that the vignette was part of the opening of Abraham's scroll, not simply part of an unrelated funerary text. In fact, the detail may have been added into the manuscript after the fact, suggesting an effort to align the picture with the narrative structure. Since Smith says the image must be part of the Book of Abraham, and because the breathing primitive whore isn't the Book of Abraham, it must in fact then be a part of another scroll or a missing portion. And I just want to note this is all bad logic. It plays on the smallest minute chance of something and
Mhm.
doesn't go with the far wide prevailing perspective in Egyptology.
Yeah, and by the way, if this sounds at all similar to the apologetics Mormon Jews on DNA, that's because they're the same. They live in the forest of the exceptions. That's where they hide. That's where
Yeah.
God hides.
Yeah.
God hides in the forest of the exceptions in Mormon.
All right. Conclusion. While the missing scroll theory lacks direct evidence, it rests on a foundation of plausibility based on unsourced historical recollection.
I don't even think it's plausible. I think it's possible in the sense that anything's possible, but I don't think it's even plausible. That's just me.
Yeah. Unsourced historical recollection, the Hugh Nibbli quote, non-credible physical papyrus analysis, John Gee's math, and interpretive ambiguity. However, its reliance on absence rather than the presence of data also makes it deeply controversial and contested explanation. And I'll just say where things stand, it's 2025 and the church is still clinging to Jewish redactor, catalyst theory, missing scroll, and they have all three of them because they all have problems. And if you go to the problems of one, they'll simply shift to another. So there's that. Okay, I just want to note here a couple funny things. The face that Joseph Smith drew onto Anubis in facsimile 1, that's sure strange.
I
Isn't
love
it?
that one.
It is strange that the two things that would make a big deal are what's missing there anyway.
Yeah, that's Opie Taylor, the idolatrous priest of Pharaoh. By the way, it strikes me about those the thing I had said before. Remember that thing I thought was brilliant about those proofs, the weak sauce proofs they have for the connections between the Book of Abraham facsimiles and ancient Egyptian, and also just the text as well.
Yeah, the canopic jars.
Yeah, I said they can't prove anything. Instead, I would try, instead of doing karate, I would take kung fu on this, and I would accept it from the apologist as legitimate evidence, right? And then use it to prove to them that this legitimate evidence of these sparse connections proves that the missing scroll theory is not true, and it also proves that the catalyst theory is not true.
Yeah,
Checkmate,
as you pointed
Jonah.
out to me. I want to just note here the stick figure face that Joseph Smith or whoever he directed, because I don't think that's Reuben Hedlock, he's quite the artist, draws a face looking at you while holding a knife.
See, that knife is up here like this. Now, you know what's really funny, Bill?
Yeah.
When the church commissioned a piece of art about the Pharaoh in color going to sacrifice not Isaac, Abraham. Have you ever seen that before? They have the priest who looks, like Yul Brynner, just like this guy will. They have him holding the knife up like that over his shoulder, just like Opie is, because it's the natural thing to do.
What piece of art are we talking about?
It's just a church piece of art that's illustrating the same thing. And if you look it up, I'm so sorry, I should have had it. I wasn't thinking it. Because when Joseph Smith gets done putting a knife in this guy's left hand, he looks like he's going to be buttering Abraham. It looks like a butter knife. He doesn't look like he's going to be sacrificing it or plunging it into him.
Yeah, I'm just looking. LDS art, Abraham, Pharaoh, sacrifice.
Opie Taylor is Norman Bates.
I'm not seeing it. I'd love if after the show's over, if you'll send me that, or if you can find it in the
I think I can do this.
Okay. I can buy some time too. So I'll just note in the prophet's direction of what's going on here, he has the face looking at the audience who's looking at the papyri. But when the church actually finishes the image, they end up having the person face forward with the knife extended. So it's some adjustment was made in order to not have it look like that. I'll just note that. And then William Appleby makes reference of the knife in the papyri. And so some apologists make the argument that in the original papyri, there was a person holding a knife, but but William Appleby could have just been either A, noticing the stick figure drawing that's been added in, and he also almost certainly would have had someone, Joseph Smith or otherwise, explaining to him what he's looking at and would have described it as a person holding a knife as well. So it makes perfect sense that that would stick out in his mind, especially if this pencil drawing was in place. Okay, so I just note that. You put these images of the knife in. What are your thoughts here?
Well, if you'll hang on a second, because I apologize. I did put them in, but I have this thing. Just trying to scroll through this. Okay.
Yeah, church art. Why don't
So
you
let me do
explain-
this. I can present this, okay?
Yeah, please.
I'll show you what I'm talking about here.
Yep.
I'm going to share the screen.
And folks, I hope you're enjoying the show tonight. Please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. A ton of work goes into putting this stuff together, and we love doing this every week for you. So hoping that folks will sign up for the newsletter and like and subscribe to the show. Oop, let me.
I did that.
There you go.
See? So in the church art where the priest is sacrificing Abraham, they're recapitulating what's in facsimile 1. They have the priest holding the knife the way that Opie Taylor was in the pencil drawing in the lacuna of the original papyrus, because that's what makes sense. See? Now it's his other hand that has it up over his other shoulder, but still it's raised as if to strike, not held out horizontally as if to butter. This is why Abraham from time to time would feel tired, like butter spread over too much toast.
Yeah.
See, he's going to butter Abraham to death.
Yeah, please.
I had put this in there because you were writing over here something about what was it? It's the bottom paragraph. Furthermore, the crescent shape of the knife in figure 3's hand is consistent with the shape of ancient Egyptian flint knives, which were used from prehistoric times to the Middle Kingdom, and thus Abraham's day, although the papyrus is from way after that, in, among other activities, ritual slaughter and execration rites. Oh my gosh. Okay. Because sometimes they would apparently sacrifice animals, but humans, no. This is what I went and did some searching. This is what I believe those kinds of knives looked like. See the serrated, made of stone. There's a slight crescent to it. But really, is that really supposed to be that knife? I don't know. Maybe. You judge.
Again, that's their strong evidence, is that the knife Smith has put in looks kind of similar to a knife used during that time period.
Yeah, but it wasn't used for human sacrifice because the Egyptians didn't do it.
Yeah.
Which is a problem for the Book of Abraham too, let's face it.
So there's the Appleby account. There's the Caswell account. I'll just note here, Franklin D. Richards, it was published in the Times and Seasons, but then it was Richards who in 1851 publishes it over in Liverpool, England, I believe.
Yes, and they have additional reading material for the saints.
That's when it really starts to kind of catch fire and then becomes canonized a few years later. So there's that. Here's Brian Haglid's post. This was making the circuit when it happened. Everybody was talking about this because you had a church apologist who at one time advocated the apologetic views to help continue belief. And now he's saying, I agree with Dan Vogel. I agree with Brent Metcalf. They can attest that my views have changed. I no longer agree with Guy and Molstein. I find their apologetic scholarship on the Book of Abraham abhorrent. Because the difference here is Hagglid has integrity. I now reject a missing Abraham manuscript. I agree that the Egyptian papers were used to produce the Book of Abraham. So he is pretty clear there. And then I'll go through this, and then I think we're pretty much done here. So problems.
Hey, Bill,
yes,
I
sir.
could read that. Is Colby asking for a StreamYard link? Do you know in the comment below that I put on the screen?
Oh, I can give it.
I can read this while you do that if you want.
Yeah, please read that. I've got it already in there. We're good.
Problems with the missing scroll theory. Wow, there's a lot of them. 7. 1. Witnesses noted 2 longer scrolls and 2 to 3 smaller pieces. right? They're accounted for. Number 2, Joseph Smith and his scribes use characters only from the existing papyri in the Kirtland Egyptian papers, and all indications are that it is connected to the translation, despite claiming the Book of Abraham came from a missing document never represented within the KEP. 3, every witness statement only speaks to the collection that is in existence, the ones that we have. 4, all indications of translation are connected to the Egyptian documents we do have. Yep. 5, great effort was made to preserve and display the breathing permit of Hor and facsimile 1 as pertinent to the Book of Abraham translation. This is what you do when you kill a deer, right, or something amazing. You cut the head off. You're going to mount the head on the wall because that shows what a great hunter you are. In the same way, of all this papyri, there's only a couple things, right, that were put on the wall in frames, and one of those was facsimile 1 of the Book of Abraham because it was so important to Joseph Smith, right? It's not something that, oh, the Book of Abraham that he translated was after it, right? Why does he translate a non-existent or a hypothesized Book of Abraham that exists on another scroll or scroll after the Book of Abraham? But the thing that you're going to memorialize as a trophy is not from that scroll about Abraham. It's from this Book of Breathings, right? Where Horus on the couch is identified as Abraham. Come on, guys. You want to continue there, Bill?
6, and again, this I wrote this out before Vogel informed me about Rittner's thing, but experts have accounted for the lengths of the rolls, concluding nothing from them is missing. And again, Rittner would say you might have 2 to 3 more columns of Egyptian characters. And then number 7, nothing in Egyptian antiquity indicates Book of Abraham material being present in Egyptian documents. And they would push back here and they would say there's this Leiden papyrus I-384 with the lion couch scene.
Mm-hmm.
And they would go, it says Abraham. And you got the audio of Molstein going, it says Abraham upon the couch. And that's bullshit.
No, it doesn't. That's where he got enthusiastic and accidentally lied all over himself.
Yes. And but what it is it's a magic spell that has tons of magic abracadabra kinds of language, and one of the abracadabra kind of words is Abraham, but it has no implications for there being biblical Abraham narrative in the document.
It's love potion number 9 is what it is, and they have names of power from all sorts of different cultures, including Hebrew as well as Egyptian, as well as other religions as well.
Did you like that I pulled that Leiden I-384 out? That was nice.
Well, I thought you must have it somewhere in front of you. Did you really?
No, I just
memory?
I just been thinking about all this stuff so much in the last couple of weeks.
Wow,
No.
I am impressed. Bravo. Bravo, Bill. Are you sure you're correct?
Yeah, I think so. People can look it up, but I think it's Leiden Papyrus I-384.
Now, there's a story here. There's a story here behind this. Okay. First off, this is the text in the Book of Abraham Apologetics by Dan Vogel, where he did mention the same point. You see, and this is what I'm going to bring up now.
Please.
Last Friday, you brought up this point. And the point is that you had come to independently, I think, was the idea that, hey, Apologists got a real problem because not only does the Book of Abraham scroll, the Book of Breathings have to have this additional segment of scroll that has the Book of Abraham on it that's missing. Same thing with the Book of Joseph, right? Because that's not the Book of Joseph. So it's got to have the same problem. It's got to be missing the end that has the Book of Joseph on it as well. So once again, if you have 2 things like that, Bill, it makes it twice as likely to be correct.
Yeah, you actually have 3 things missing. So this, you're right. You and I had a conversation. I said, RFM, this problem's way worse. It's missing a Book of Joseph as well. And then just yesterday or day before, you pulled this off the shelf.
This morning.
Dan Vogel.
I was on the phone with you.
Dan Vogel came to the same.
Actually, might have been yesterday. It was yesterday morning, and I was on the phone with you. Boy, time is it all. Forget about it. But I knew. But Bill was talking about this again, and I went to the bookshelf at the apartment because it might be there, and it was there. And I found Dan's book, and I opened it up while I'm talking to Bill, and Bill heard me laugh out loud.
Yeah.
And I didn't interrupt Bill. I let him finish his thought, and then I said, "You know why I was laughing out loud?" I said, "Why?" Because I just pulled this book out, and here's the table. I opened it up, and the page it opened to was this one.
Yeah.
With that very point on it.
So Dan Vogel came to it first. I cannot take credit for this. Dan Vogel says, hey, whoa, wait a minute, guys. If you're going with a missing portion or a missing scroll, you actually have two things you need to find, not just one. And I want to note there's a third thing. Joseph Smith claimed that one of the smaller fragments contained the story of a princess Khatumen or Khatumen. This was actually an Egyptian book of the dead for Amenhotep. Khatumen prince. This is Joseph Smith papers sharing these documents. The originals are down below, but this is Joseph Smith and his scribes. This is Khatumen, princess, daughter of Onitis, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who began to reign in the year of the world 2962. Khatumen was born in the 30th year of the reign of her father and died when she was 28 years old, which was the year 3020. This is the other Book of the Dead that would have had some length to it, but not been as long as the two main rolls. And there's a whole third story that Joseph Smith is positing is in there. There's a second location of the same idea, a translation of the next page in parts. Khatumen, princess of Onitis, king of Egypt, who began to reign in the year of the world 2962. Khatumen was born in the 30th year of the reign of her father and died, and she was 28 years old, which was the year 3020. So, by the way, I just want to note the king of Egypt is named Onitis, which sort of resembles Oneida a little bit. That word seems to be something Joseph has no problem pulling up.
Well, there weren't any people called Oneida in Joseph Smith's neighborhood, thank goodness.
Yeah, well, that's not true either. So
there
good job.
Were? What?
There's an Oneida people, yes.
Well, the Oneida tribe, but other than them.
You actually require 3 missing scrolls because this isn't the Book of Joseph, nor is the Book of the Dead for Amenhotep, the history of Princess Khatumen. So there are 3 things missing, 3 missing portions, 3 missing scrolls, 3 catalyst theories. This just gets really complicated, and I can guarantee you're not going to have any apologists address this issue because by the time they add 3 of these in, they also know that the problem is then insurmountable, and they need to present it as surmountable, and you just won't have them doing that. Here, I'll bring Kobe on. Kobe, how are you?
Kobe,
hey guys, how are you?
How you doing?
How are you?
I'm doing well. I've really enjoyed this episode.
Looks like you're losing weight.
I had just one. What's that?
It looks like you're losing weight.
Oh, okay.
It's a visual gag. It's not very good. These are the jokes. This is what happens at 2 hours and 30 minutes in.
Your screen is thinner, so he's...
Thank you, Bill. See, Bill gets me. It's because we've been married for about 8 years now. I'm sorry. You wanted to say something.
I bet I've lasted longer than at least one of your marriages.
You have, actually.
Oh, good.
I would have filed for divorce against you by now if you were my first wife.
I love it.
Oh, that's hilarious. I just had one thing to add,
Please.
And you guys were cutting out a little bit for me, so I'll just add this and then I'll go. But this actually comes from one of the episodes RFM and I did responding to Jacob Hansen on the Book of Abraham, which he said that he'd be responding to us with a separate video. RFM, we're still waiting on that 3 months later. I think I'm getting a feeling
doing some kind of a cruise.
Yeah, I think I'm getting a feeling for why he doesn't want to respond is because there is no victory to be found in these weeds for the apologists. But one of the things I wanted to highlight is that the Joseph Smith journals in 1835 and 1842 talk about the translation and the transcription, and Dan shared some of those comments in the live chat. The one entry I wanted to share with you, and RFM will probably remember this, but on the October 1st, 1835 entry, Joseph has written, "This afternoon labored on the Egyptian alphabet in company with brothers Oliver Cowdery and W.W. Phelps." And then it says, "The system of astronomy was unfolded." And here's why I wanted to highlight this, because what the apologists try and do is they'll try and argue this ridiculous missing scroll theory, Bill, and I think you really drove a stake into the heart of that. But the other argument they'll do is, of course, this catalyst theory, which is, well, Joseph could have been looking at these papyri and then it shook loose a revelation. And what I wanted to just highlight is how ridiculous this is. because the apologists are trying to desperately separate Joseph Smith from the Kirtland Egyptian papers because they are so damning.
I've done that
And
with many a client in a criminal case before a trial. I
that's
try
right.
and get them out of the room where the crime happened.
Exactly. And so one of the things we highlighted in one of our presentations together, RFM, is we have this October 1st, 1835 journal entry. And then if you go look at the Egyptian alphabets, so there are several of them. One of them, if you look closely, you'll notice is in Joseph Smith's handwriting. And in the version that's in Joseph Smith's handwriting, you have several entries there. One of the entries is Ja-O-A, Flo-Is, and Flo-Isis. You then have translations of those characters in a separate Egyptian alphabet that has the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery on there. So remember that Joseph mentions or has mentioned in the journal working with Oliver Cowdery and W.W. Phelps. The handwriting for these two different Egyptian alphabets, actually here, I have the slide up. I could probably just, can you see that? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
I sort of think so. Can you see that okay, Bill?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is from one of those presentations we had done, RFM, but I just wanted to highlight this. You've got the Egyptian alphabet A, which I've got the snippet there on the left. You've got the Egyptian alphabet B, which I've got the snippet there on the right. You've got the journal entry right there above it, where it's talking about W.W. Phelps and Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith. If you look at whose handwriting is involved in these entries, we've got those same exact three characters. Let me go to the next slide. This is from the actual facsimile number 2, where you have the Earth being recognized as Ja-O-A, the Moon being recognized as Flo-Is, and the stars the sun/stars associated with Flo-Isis. My point is just that you really can't pivot to this catalyst theory because the apologists want to say, well, Joseph Smith was receiving a revelation. But right there in Joseph Smith's journal, he's talking about receiving a revelation relating to the system of astronomy. We have it right there in the Kirtland Egyptian papers, and then it's incorporated into the Book of Abraham's facsimiles, and it's wrong. Like Joseph Smith didn't understand Egyptian at a very basic level, and so I just wanted to add that to everything great you guys have shared, because there really is I think the Book of Abraham is the clearest smoking gun that Mormonism is not true that can exist, because every single instance you look at, it is just so damning. And I just wanted to add that one in addition to what you've shared. Thanks so much for this episode.
Take it easy. Oh, I can't hear you, RFM.
Sending a secret. That's because I was sending a secret message of love to Colby.
The problem gets even worse. Remember this one. This is Don Bradley and Mark Ashurst McGee trying to give an apologetic argument for the Kinderhook plates. They solved that problem by saying Joseph was doing real translation, because remember that boat image in the Kirtland Egyptian papers? What Joseph said about that symbol in the Kinderhook plates is extremely similar to what he says that symbol means in the Kirtland Egyptian papers. The trouble with that is that locks in that the actual translation in the Kirtland Egyptian papers is tied directly to the translation of the Book of the Dead of Hor, the Book of Breathing Primitive Hor, that is the Book of Abraham papyrus. And hence this is a evidence, while it might be an evidence for a translation of the Kinderhook plates, it turns out to be an evidence against both a catalyst theory and a missing scroll theory for the Book of Abraham, and they didn't realize that they were fixing one problem and creating another.
Yeah, and I will say, I think that to the extent that that's correct, and the figures are not exact, but the language is pretty close, that I think that what this has done is it has potentially given us the clue as to how it was that Joseph Smith came up with that very partial interpretation or translation of the Kinderhook plates.
It makes
he
sense.
actually only saw one figure on it that he compared to his own dictionary, his alphabet and grammar.
Yeah.
And then he saw that, he thought that looked similar. So he said, this is what it means, is what I had transcribed before or translated before, got written down. And I think that's probably where it came from, without saying anything about inspiration or God.
Yeah. Okay. So by the way, something similar on the characters. I don't know who was pointing this out, but just to show that that character is very similar to the boat figure there, but I don't need to make any meaning out of that. Just interesting. And then last thing, and then we'll take a couple of phone calls and we'll end the night. University of Chicago Egyptologist Robert Rittner concluded in 2014 that the source of the Book of Abraham is the breathing pyramid of Hor. Again, if you ask any Egyptologist other than Stephen Smoot, other than John Gee, other than Kerry Molstein, every other Egyptologist outside of Mormonism is going to go, Robert Rittner is the most trusted source on this. And he says that the Book of Abraham is the breathing pyramid of Hor, misunderstood and mistranslated by Joseph Smith, and that the other papyri are common Egyptian funerary documents like the Book of the Dead, and every non-Mormon Egyptologist who has weighed in has agreed with him. And that's it. I will say I've reached out to some Egyptologists, but I will save that correspondence for when we get into the carved snout of Anubis, which will be sometime maybe in a month or so.
Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Anything else from you, my friend?
You have correspondence. See, you actually reached out to some Egyptologists. Karakuni is a one.
I got an answer from Akuni. I think it is Karakuni. I got an answer from her.
Or Larry. It's Karakuni. UCLA. She's the one who's embarrassed about Kerry Muhlestein ever getting his Egyptian degree from him.
I got something from Akuni. Kathleen Cooney. Kara Cooney did respond.
Kara Cooney. Oh yeah.
Kara Cooney responded to me. John Darnell responded to me.
From Darnell.
And Dr. Zahi Hawass responded to me. So
I haven't heard of the third one.
I'll share those.
Yeah, Kara Cooney, she is I've seen, I can't recall exactly what she looks like, but she's a person who goes on shows and she sort of popularizes the whole Egyptological thing. And she does get it thrown in her face on a regular basis from people with questions like you about Kerry Muhlestein, because UCLA gave him his freaking doctorate. So now he's an Egyptologist, and she feels like the school is having a hard time living it down.
Yeah, she thinks he's a hack. And
he is a hack.
And John Gee studied under Robert Rittner, and Robert Rittner, as the expert, thinks John Gee is ridiculous.
Yes. So Muhlstein's a hack, Gee is ridiculous, and Smoot isn't even an Egyptologist yet. Yeah. Although he's on the right track to being both a hack and ridiculous. A ridiculous hack.
There you go. All right, let's get a couple calls and close this night out. So I think this is Barry Richards or
Barry Richards.
Yeah, Barry Richards. Is that who this is, my friend?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Barry, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Bill?
Good. Go ahead, my friend.
Hey, I've been ever since I watched Robert Rittner, and I went to 5 different graduate schools, and I'm only saying that because probably one wouldn't take me, but I don't remember.
You just kept flunking out, huh?
I went to a lot of schools, and I can read in at least 4 languages, or maybe 5, and I know a lot about translation. But one of the things that got me when I was trying to people started talking about there must have been a longer roll. The problem is Joseph Smith couldn't even translate the shorter rolls. Even if there had been a longer roll, he could not have translated it. So it doesn't even fit. It doesn't even make sense. So that's just a thought that I could leave with you guys today.
No, you're right. Barry, you're absolutely right. Joseph Smith has left us all sorts of evidence that he could not translate Egyptian. And in letters that he wrote.
That's right.
Where he says the Egyptian word this, and then he gives a mistranslation as if he knows what the hell he's talking about, and he doesn't. I think that's in his letter to the Green Mountain Boys.
Yeah, and in my mind, knowing how hard it is to translate, Joseph Smith is full of shit when he talks about all the things he can say and do, and he throws out words here and there. Mm-hmm. And he just wasn't educated enough to even know what he was talking about. And I think he used the Egyptian language because it was being talked so much about in the world at that time. It hadn't been too long before that they found the Rosetta Stone in Egypt while Napoleon's armies were there. And one of the things that I think he did in the Book of Mormon, and I think he did it again with the Book of Abraham, Joseph was taking a chance. And so he called it, Reformed Egyptian or Egyptian, whichever book he was talking about. But no one knew how to translate that. So he was taking a chance, and he had no idea what was going to happen the next year. And even by the last of 1840 or something like that, some of that Egyptian could be translated. And so Joseph was cutting it really close. And probably his death was very fortunate for him, because there might have been scholars right there in the United States at that time to say, this guy's full of shit. He doesn't
by
know
1856,
Egyptian whatsoever.
By 1856, just 12 years later, there was an Egyptologist looking at some of those fragments in St. Louis at the museum there and saying, no, this isn't what Joseph Smith said it was. This is just standard funerary text.
Yeah. Well, like you guys, I was born, I wasn't born in the church, but I grew up in the church and believed it as heavily like you guys did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my testimony in the church died of 1,000 doubts.
Mm.
And tonight, when you guys were thinking, I thought, I want to share that with you, because some of those things were in me from a long time back. And you guys, kind of stimulated me a little bit to remember some things. And so anyway, I just wanted to share and see what you guys thought.
Well, I think that there's nothing I enjoy quite so much as stimulating Barry.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Barry.
Well, you're welcome, guys. Thanks for giving me a little bit of time.
Yeah. Have a great night.
Sure. Great. Great to hear from you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
All right. Last call here might be Chuck. So let's see. Chuck, is that the name?
Yeah.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah. Hello, gentlemen.
They call me Chuck.
You both look great tonight, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm wearing my what is that? Deadpool. My Deadpool shirt.
Oh yeah.
The Merc with the mouth.
Your audience needs to know you guys are both better looking in person than you are on the screen even.
Are you my stalker? Are you the guy I had to get that no contact order against?
Yes, that was me.
This qualifies as a violation of the order.
Well, then I'll make it quick. Hey, to your last caller's point, there's this guy, Carl Richard Lepsis. If you look him up, he's notorious for carving some graffiti into the Great Pyramid on the Giza Plateau in January of 1843. So within months of having the Book of Abraham published, he's carving Egyptian with all their names directly into the Great Pyramid. So it's just unfolding just as he's doing the Book of Abraham. It's going to come to bite him real quick, as you can see from that.
Okay, I'm not quite understanding you. So at the same time that Joseph, 1830s, 1840s, something's happening over in Egypt and somebody's carving things into the pyramids. Well, he's
you should look
facing
it
the
up.
pyramids, right?
Right. But he's carving it in Egyptian is the point. In 1833, he starts to study under Champollion. And by 1843, he's carving Egyptian hieroglyphs of a trip that he's taken there to the pyramid. He's carving the names of all the people that are there in the trip, the person who financed the trip. It's kind of a famous defacing of the Great Pyramid.
But these are names found in cartouches, right? So it's sort of
these are their names. He is translating their names into Egyptian.
How would one do that? Just phonetically?
He learned Egyptian.
Just phonetically.
Yeah. It's a phonetic. Yeah.
Okay.
It's phonetic.
No, I didn't know that. I'd never heard of that person.
Your last caller just reminded me of that kind of, so.
Oh, and here's, I don't think is this the same person, but the 1856 Egyptologist I was referring to was Theodule Charles de Vieri. I think he's French or something.
De Veria.
Is that the same person you were talking about?
Theodule de Veria.
No.
I don't know if that's what he's talking about, but I'm familiar with that name.
You're amazing, Bill.
Typing it in chat.
You've immersed yourself in the subject. How come you don't know the name of the guy that this caller's talking about? Though? That's what I wanted.
I don't. It might be in tomorrow's video. I might have just forgotten about it. Folks
Carl
should check it
Richard
out. It's the name.
Sepsis. That's his name. Lepsis. Sorry.
Yeah,
It's not sepsis.
yeah.
It
There's
sounds
some
painful.
cool stuff out there about it. It's a cool inscription. He wrote about it in his journals and everything, so we know the date and everything he did it on. So it's interesting. But I'm sitting here. I've got Hugh Nibbli in my lap, the message of the Joseph Smith papyri, an Egyptian endowment, and I'm just debunking you guys through this whole episode with it.
Ooh, a dream come
It
true
occurs to me.
to have Nibbli in your lap. But here's the thing, okay? That book can't debunk us because all that Hugh Nibbli's doing is he's decided that since he can't win on this playing field, he's going to go over and try and win on a different playing field where nobody has shown up. So what he's going to do in that book, which I've read and I still have it, is slow going. How far are you in that? Have you gotten very far?
Yeah, I read it once upon a time when I was younger. The pictures in here are just mesmerizing. I stared at this book for hours in the past.
Really? I barely slogged my way through it once. But I realized what it was that Hugh Nibbli was trying to do, which is he is actually looking at the papyri that was recovered, okay, the 11 fragments. And he's actually trying to give a translation of what's on the 11 fragments, which has nothing to do with the Book of Abraham. But then what he's trying to do is say, okay, well, having looked at what's actually on these fragments, I'm going to go back to my methodology of looking at parallels. And I'm going to find parallels between this and associated concepts in other literature that sound, or I can make sound like what happens in the Mormon temple. Do I have that right? Isn't that what the book is about?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. He's
Totally.
inventing a lot of stuff. He's showing a lot of other Egyptian and imposing it into what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, that is a white flag of a book. He has raised the white flag. It came out like in 75, I think it was. So 67, the fragments are discovered. By 68, he's trying to make room for the lost scroll by talking about this made-up story about the scroll going between rooms at the mansion house. And now by 75, he's given up on that, and he has signaled that he is defeated, that he's surrendering on that entire issue. And he's going to go with a completely different point of attack that has nothing to do with the Book of Abraham having anything to do with what's on the scrolls. That's how I read him doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. He's kind of all over the place, but it just reminded me there's no one standing here in this breach you guys have made to help give Brother Joseph a break. And so I'm going to come
Give
here
Brother
and
Joseph a break.
provide. That's exactly right.
Pretty good, huh?
Brother
I'm going to
Joseph a
stand
break.
in the breach here. And there's proof in the Book of Abraham that Joseph hit a bullseye here. And you guys are just going to have to defend or find your way out of this, I think. If you look at Abraham 4:27, this is
Yes.
proof that they could see our day.
Yes, this is part of
Here we
one of the
learn
creation
about-
accounts.
Yes. And here we learn about modern pronouns and how the church should have embraced them long ago. It says,
I hope it's not the
Oh,
one that says
God,
that Satan is
damn.
abroad in the land.
no, but it's not nearly that good.
Okay.
It says, so the gods went down to organize man in their own image, in the image of the gods, to form they, him, male and female, to form
Created-
they, them.
Yes.
Therefore, I don't want to hear anybody giving people a hard time about pronouns in the Mormon church ever again. It's right there in their book.
What did they do? What happened there? Maybe I missed it. It just sounded awkwardly phrased.
It is awkwardly phrased, but it is clearly modern pronouns. I don't want to hear them giving trans people any grief. It's part of their doctrine now.
Are you saying Adam was trans?
Hey, it says he, him, or sorry,
They, them.
they, him, they, him, and they, them.
Yeah. Seems like
Okay.
there's room. Well, thank you, caller. Thank you very
You
much.
could see the future then.
Appreciate
You're
you.
right.
He could absolutely see the future.
Okay. Take it easy, my friend.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank
Hey,
you.
hey, are you still there? Are you still there?
He's there.
Yeah, I'm
Okay. Now, Spin has put created they, them, they / them. Thank you. When I can see it now, I get it better than when I was just hearing it. Can you see the screen?
I
Caller?
see it. Yes, sir.
See, created they/them. And God created they, them. Got it now. I totally got this. Thank you. That's funny.
All
I'm
right.
laughing in here where it counts.
Have a great day, Chuck.
See ya.
Take it easy.
They call me Chuck.
They call me tater salad. So hey, just want to know, because I wanted to find this earlier. It's not the problem gets so much worse. I put the link in the live chat so somebody could go. It's this link right here. You can take in just how much Joseph Smith doesn't know about Egyptian. I'm gonna go back to that for just a second, RFM.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No worries. But this is the number system he came up with. This is a whole page. There's like 6 pages or something, but this is one page. And then, he's got the symbols, and they usually match. The English symbols match pretty much. The Egyptian symbols for the numbers pretty much match English symbols for the numbers.
Well, they were an advanced race.
And then he writes down the Egyptian word for the number. And then he's got what it equals in English to that, right? It's just crazy how much Egyptian he thought he wanted people to think he could translate. And the missing scroll doesn't solve the stupidity. The catalyst theory doesn't solve the stupidity. The workarounds don't work. Anyway,
He was on the right track. Unfortunately, he went to Egypt for our numbers instead of Arabic.
Yeah. Sometimes I think he's speaking Chinese, but there's that. All right. So anything else from you? Otherwise, another fun episode. We start at 6 now, so we've gone 3 hours tonight, folks.
And we would have gone 6 hours no matter what time we'd started, apparently.
Right.
But yeah, so that means it's 9 o'clock where you live, isn't it?
9 p.m. here.
And we're, Dan Vogel, it's 11.
Yeah. Get some
Ohio
sleep.
is Eastern time, apparently.
Eastern time over there. Yeah, he lives near Kirtland.
Yeah. That always surprises me. But then I look at a map and Ohio is further east than I would think.
Oh, well. A 24-hour drive from Utah.
Wow. Really? So you know how far east it is.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have so much fun on Friday for Mormonism After Dark, aren't we, Bill?
Yeah. You have any thoughts on Mormonism After Dark?
No thoughts at all.
All right.
Not a one. But the reason why is because I try not to have thoughts about Mormonism After Dark, because this is supposed to be viewer driven.
Yeah.
And you call in and you use the Zoom link, like it's not Zoom, a StreamYard link, like Colby did tonight. And you come on the show and you just talk about whatever it is you want to talk about, as long as it has some kind of relation to Mormonism.
Yep.
And we'll take care of the After Dark part, and that'll make it the Mormonism After Dark.
Yeah. So we'll see you Friday, folks, 8 p.m. for the late night show, and Monday for the newscast at 6. And otherwise, we'll see you back here on the flip side for the next episode of Mormonism Live at 6 p.m. Radio Free Mormon and myself, Bill Reel. Grateful to have you guys with us. Have a great night, and we'll see all of you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.